Chapter 1963. After Northern Mang became the imperial preceptor of this dynasty under the decree of peace, they were no longer the same as they were in the past when it came to attacking huge cities and towns that were difficult for warhorses to leap over. In the first great battle of Liangmang, Dongzhuo broke through the #1 town at the border of Lianghutu city. Zhong Tanlian broke through Yozhou's Huluku city, Krugong city and Wanhe city. Not only that, the grassland cavalry who aspired to annex the Central Plains had also studied deeply on how to break through the dense infantry formation. Chunjibo Tuoba Chiyun was even more knowledgeable in this field. Before he officially joined the army, during the meeting between the monarch and the minister, he specialized in discussing the battle of cavalry and infantry. He spoke eloquently and in detail, making the Northern Mang Empress, who was familiar with military affairs, exclaim in admiration. Under the promotion of the Taiping Commandery, almost every generals of the Southern Dynasty would have 1 or 2 military advisors from the pivotal hall of Shijing. Most of these people were young who were brought to the Southern Dynasty by Hongjia. They could be considered as the 3rd generation of scholars after their families took root in the grassland. There were also young and strong Shuiwei who came from the Norland of the grassland, but there were not many of them. Most of the generals of the Southern Dynasty sneered at them and regarded them as the military supervisors. In fact, there were some top nobles in the Southern Dynasty who were willing to pay attention to this group of young people. General Yang Yuanzhan, who had died in the battle at Huku City in Yuzhou. At that time, Yang Yuanzhan brought a large number of young talents from the pivotal hall of Shijing. There were as many as 100 of them, but they were all turned into piles of bones. Although the old lady finally exchanged Lu Jinu's body in Hutu City for several heads, including Yang Yuanzhan's, she showed a rare stingy and mean attitude about Yang Yuanzhan's posthumous title after he died on the battlefield. She did not even give a token order to appease the Yangs. It was said that the emperor even pointed at the head of the old general in the lime box and said to the Taiping Commandery standing beside her that Yang Yuanzhan deserved to die for destroying her 10 years of foundation. When the 5 generals of the Southern Dynasty met to discuss whether to fight this battle or not, a pivotal hall of Shijing with a low rank suggested to divide the army into 2 groups based on Ma Lang's description. 30,000 cavalrymen would attack the corridor and 20,000 cavalrymen would go south to help the Crone Mountain. Only one of the 5 Beimang generals from different military towns agreed. The other 4 rejected this overly conservative proposal. The middle-aged general from Maolong military town was known for his violent character in the Southern Dynasty. He directly bent over and pointed his whip at the young man's nose, scolded him for being a kid who didn't even know how to speed was the most important thing in war. How could he know the importance of war? Be quick. He also asked the young man in a strange tone, "Are you a spy planted in the Southern Dynasty by the Bailiang Frontier Army?" The only old general who agreed with the young man's cautious proposal couldn't bear it. Just as he was about to say something to smooth things over, he heard the other 3 generals who had similar positions and more power laugh out loud. The men of the grassland, especially the strong in the army, always believed that they could be killed but not humiliated. The young man whose father had died in battle outside Bailiang was so angry that his eyes turned red. He almost ground his teeth to pieces. In the end, he took the initiative to ask to be the vanguard of the cavalry. Before he left, he sneered and said, "After I die, I'll see how you die in the underworld." The 4 ambitious generals didn't care at all. The young man who had read a few tattered books and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth wanted to die. They who had no relationship with him couldn't be bothered to stop him. However, after the 2,000 vanguard cavalry ran into a wall, all of the generals began to realize that the situation wasn't good. It wasn't that they didn't understand the natural mobility brought by abandoning the war horses. It wasn't easy to use cavalry to break through the infantry formation head-on. The cavalry who opened the way would inevitably die when they ran into the formation. However, even the oldest generals didn't expect the infantry formation's defense to be so shocking. If it was said that the 5,000 infantrymen hiding behind the horse barricade formation shot out arrows like a torrential downpour, it was still within reason. However, there were still more than 1,000 of the 2,000 cavalrymen who charged behind the wall. The bloody scene of both men and horses dying in an instant was still extremely shocking to the captains, who had seen many bloody battlefields. These 2,000 elite cavalrymen were undoubtedly 2,000 men of sacrifice. Almost everyone knew that they would die if they charged forward, so they began to accelerate at the edge of the range of the crossbows. When the 1,000 or so cavalrymen crashed into the horse barricade formation, their momentum was actually the strongest and their speed was the fastest. When a single cavalryman crashed into the horse barricade formation, relying on the inertia brought by the galloping war horses, the terrifying impact was self-evident. In the end, more than 1,000 men of sacrifice, men and horses, all died under the long spears. No less than 600 war horses were directly pierced through by the long spears. The most terrifying thing was that the second group of cavalry was almost visible to the naked eye. Those strangely long spears displayed incredible toughness. After piercing through the warhorse corpses, most of the spears only bent and didn't break before they were pulled out of the corpses. For example, the normal cavalry of the Southern Dynasty's border army was usually given a cavalry spear. Often it would break after 1 or 2 charges. Only the elite soldiers under the direct command of great generals like Dong Zhuo, Lu Gui, and Yang Yuanzhan were able to repeatedly ram into the formation without breaking. However, as the grassland cavalry who were familiar with archery and horses, they all knew that even the Winter Thunder elite cavalry under the command of Orange Province's sectional magistrate Murong Baoding's spears were not as unreasonable as the spears in the hands of the Liuzhou monk infantry army. Although these 2,000 cavalrymen were a little timid, before the horn of retreat sounded behind them, no one dared to turn around and retreat. It wasn't that these cavalrymen didn't care about their lives, nor were they completely unafraid of death. Although the border army of the Southern Dynasty was not as strict as the Bailiang Su family, if they retreated at the last minute, not only would they implicate their superiors, but also their whole family. They really couldn't be timid. As the 2,000 cavalrymen were charging, the Liuzhou infantry army in their sight slowly moved back more than 10 steps. The shield formation was still like a wall, the infantry spears were still like a forest, and the arrows were still like rain. The young Shijing advisor who died on the battlefield when he was 20 years old happened to be hanging on a slanted infantry spear before the infantry army retreated. It was like a scarlet sugar-coated haw, both funny and tragic. Before he died, his chest and the head of his mount were pierced through by the infantry spear. The young man used all his strength to reach out and hold on to the infantry spear. The corner of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't open his mouth. If he could return alive, he would definitely insist on taking a detour to the south. He would tell the 5 generals of the border army who mistakenly thought that a great achievement was at their fingertips that this thing was called a long spear. The shaft was extremely tough, the grip was extremely strong, and the tip was extremely sharp. When the sharp knife and heavy axe struck, there would be the sound of metal and stone. It would never crack or break. It had always been the white blade and the sharpest weapon that countless cavalry generals in the Central Plains dreamed of. The Han family of Jizhou, who had been competing with the grassland cavalry army for nearly 400 years, always had the tradition of taking the spear after the death of the father. This meant that a good spear that was hard to break was far more suitable to be a family heirloom than a good knife that could cut through iron like mud. Killing the enemy on horseback with a long spear in hand was always successful. The cavalry general who held the spear almost didn't have to worry about the force of the spear hurting his arm. How bad could it be to use the infantry formation to stop the horses? The second wave of 2,000 cavalry still didn't survive, but in the end the infantry formation was loosened. Hundreds of cavalry crashed into the first row of Liuzhou monk soldiers with shields and died with blood splattering everywhere. In total, more than 300 lances of the 1,000 paces had been broken. The poet of the Great Feng dynasty once wrote a border fortress poem that had been passed down to this day. It described the outstanding military exploits of a famous general at the border, but in front of the battle he was defeated by the enemy. The sentence was simple and straightforward, but it was also very vivid. The word defeated was the finishing touch. One of the generals sitting on horseback couldn't help but raise his butt and look at the battlefield in the distance. He was dumbfounded and couldn't say a single word. They weren't afraid of dying, but if they died so quickly, how could they fight the war? Even if it were 2 cavalry armies fighting, how long would it take to charge and break through the enemy's formation with a short 300 paces? The generals of the Maolong army, who had previously mocked the staff of the Cardinal Hall of Shijing, secretly swallowed his saliva. He turned his head stiffly and said to the old generals, "Should we leave this place and take a 60-mile detour to Laohu Mountain?" The old general, who actually only had 6,000 cavalry under him, shook his head and said in a deep voice, "The most difficult thing for a cavalry to break an infantry formation is at the beginning. This Liuzhou monk soldier's barricade is the most powerful, causing us to suffer heavy losses. This is reasonable. I believe that as long as we break through those few rows of spears, the rest will be much smoother." Chapter 1964. The faces of the other captains were uncertain. The old general calmly said, "Although it's not that we can't split up the troops to go to the Crone Mountain battlefield, or even withdraw the entire army from this place and take a detour to the south, I feel that the northern Liang border army must be plotting something on the Crone Mountain battlefield, or they are afraid that we will encircle them. In any case, the fastest way for us to pass through this corridor is the best choice. How can there be no deaths in a war? Let me be the one leading the charge next." This old general used to be a centurion under Huang Songpu with mediocre intelligence. After Huang Songpu left the army and entered the imperial court in the western capital, he was promoted step by step until he became the king of the southern courtyard. Only then did the old general rise in status and become the head of a medium-sized military town in the hinterland of Gusai state. Unlike the other 4 captains who secretly received boxes of gold and silver before they went to war, the old general rejected the invitation of the 3 second-class noble sects. However, he volunteered to go to the Crone Mountain. Since he was not here for money in the eyes of outsiders, it was probably because he was old but not old at heart. When the 4 generals saw the old general urging his horse forward, the Maolong army cavalry was stunned. "Old general, are you going to break the formation yourself?" The white-haired old general turned around and smiled faintly. "Many of my men are about the same age as my grandson. As the main general of a town, of course I have to." One of the young generals frowned and interrupted the old man's words. "Old general, according to the military law of the border, the main general must die in battle. Once he is defeated, all the Kiliarchs and centurions will be executed." The old general dismissed it with a smile and glanced at the infantry formation in the south corridor. "To open this formation, 6,000 cavalry is definitely not enough. The 8,000 men in my town who are not afraid of death have already followed me here." Perhaps these were the old man's last words. The 6,000 cavalry split into 3 groups and began to charge one after another. After 2 heroic charges, they finally broke through Liuzhou's shield and lance formations. The old general took the lead, his entire body bathed in blood. He crashed into the 800 mo sabers. The monk soldiers wielding Baoyang's special Modeo were the strongest among the monk soldiers of Mount Lantua. Furthermore, they were clad in iron armor over their kasayas. They moved forward in formation and brandished their sabers to chop down the horses. Their speed was unparalleled. Including the old general, 1,200 cavalry died under the Mo saber, which appeared for the first time on the battlefield of Liangmang. The Beimang cavalry was defeated in one battle and defeated again in another battle. The Old Woman Mountain battlefield had already experienced 2 mutual chiseling formations. Out of the 10,000 cavalry in Lu province, only 4,000 remained. Of the 6,000 cavalry in the newly built direct crash battalion, there were less than 1,500. In terms of casualties, the 2 wings of the Longxiang army suffered fewer casualties, with 13,000 of them still able to fight. The Beimang South conquering army led by Huang Songpu had 60,000 cavalry at the start. At this moment there were still 48,000 cavalry on horseback. This seemingly superior exchange of cavalry was what the Beimang teacher looked forward to the most. Liuzhou battlefield, a small loss for the main force of the South conquering army is a great victory. If there were no accidents after 2 more such exchanges, the Longxiang army that had reached 30,000 men at its peak and the direct crash battalion that had just raised their camp flag would become a thing of the past. Lu province's main general Ko Jianghuai, who stood at the peak of Old Woman Mountain from beginning to end, in this type of extremely grim situation, didn't change the formation at all. He only sent someone to pass down the order for the 3,000 cavalry under the command of the provincial governor's manor that was originally outside the battlefield to follow the main force that returned to their original positions after the 2 chiseling attacks, to enter the formation behind Chi Fulong Pass and participate in the 3rd round of attacks. Huang Songpu also ordered the 500 to 600 heavy cavalry to prepare to enter the battlefield. The old commander's only worry was that the battle had reached such a stage. On the Beimang side, the Liuzhou cavalry had suffered heavy casualties, while on his side, the Wanyan elite cavalry under his command had suffered even more casualties than the B cavalry. If not for this, he would not even use the heavy cavalry that was originally used to take the head of either Ko Jianghuai or Zhou Xian. Qin Shiliang could not help but ask, if we charge again, the Liuzhou cavalry will only exist in name. Ko Jiangjun, shouldn't we slow down? Ko Jianghuai shook his head and said, we cannot slow down. At this stage it is a matter of one breath. Let alone the fact that Yuan Nanting's White Feather Light Cavalry and Ningamei's Iron Stupa cannot hurry to Old Woman Mountain for now. Even if they can immediately enter the battlefield, I will have the Liuzhou cavalry and Long Xiang army charged 2 more times. Otherwise, even if the monk soldiers on the western border can stop the 50,000 southern reinforcements, with Huang Songpu's ability, at least 20,000 cavalry will be able to escape. Once they meet up with the remaining cavalry on the northern corridor, our previous 3 battles, including this one, will have been for nothing. It is even equivalent to me, Ko Jianghuai, dragging the 3 armies of Qinyuan Army Town into the quagmire that is Liuzhou. Qin Shiliang sighed and did not continue to speak. Ko Jianghuai suddenly turned his head and said softly, during the Battle of Phoenix Army Town, the defending general used the Liuzhou provincial governor's office to publicly impeach Xie Shibian. You wrote, not against military law but against reason. I want to thank you. Ko Jianghuai's words were very direct and clear. He wanted to say goodbye to Liuzhou and thank him, not to thank the western frontier. In reality, although Xie Shibian's neutral and peaceful comments were not as harsh as provincial governor Yang Guangdou's, it was still not beneficial to Xie Shibian, who was at the heart of the storm at the time. However, the truth was the opposite. Qin Shiliang, who already had a certain amount of weight in the Beiliang frontier army, was intentionally protecting the Liuzhou deputy general who had angered the public. Once his words sided with Xie Shibian, it would only provoke a fierce backlash from the Liangzhou cavalry and the entire Yuzhou infantry. At that time, it would be extremely difficult for the young feudal lord to personally protect Xie Shibian. In the end, once Xie Shibian became a rat crossing the street in the eyes of the Beiliang frontier army, then not only Ko Jianghuai, who was also a young man and a foreigner, but even Yu Luandao, who had won the approval of the Beiliang frontier army, would be implicated. Qin Shiliang smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said emotionally, this situation was created by the efforts of the prince. No need to thank me. If you really want to thank me, next time go to Beijing to thank the prince. Ko Jianghuai curled his lips. Why should I thank him? Since he is the king of Beiliang, these are the things he should do. The next time I go to Beijing, I will be kind if I don't ask him to be the commander-in-chief of the Beiliang cavalry. Ko Jianghuai suddenly said self-deprecatingly, but I don't think I can beat Yuan Baixiong. This is the bad thing about being in Beiliang. The people who lead the army to war are fiercer than the other. There are so many martial arts grandmasters. Before, when I was in Guangling, my swordsmanship was passable. I was confident in fighting in the court. Now I can't. With a heavy heart, Qin Shiliang finally smiled a little. The two looked around. On the battlefield of Crone Mountain, the commander-in-chief of the Long Xiang army, Su Longxiang, had killed 300 enemies. This was under the premise that he ensured the charging formation of the cavalry. If he did not care about anything else and went all out to kill, the commander-in-chief of the Beimeng cavalry would probably collapse. Ko Jianghuai's gaze shifted to the B cavalry formation, which had the largest number of enemies. He smiled coldly and muttered to himself, I will kill them after I fatten them up. 3 cavalry armies entered the battlefield of Liuzhou. Among them, the general of Liangzhou, Shi Fu, led the 8,000 cavalry of the Qinyuan army. They did not go to Crone Mountain. Instead, they went straight to the corridor. They were not there to save people, but to stop the southern Beimeng cavalry that continued south through the corridor. There might be 30,000 or 20,000. From Shi Fu's point of view, Xie Shibian and the monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain would definitely die. Ningamei's Iron Stupa had suffered heavy losses in the Dragon Eye Plain. However, the young lord had allocated all 800 white horses to the Iron Stupa. He even ordered all the generals of the 4th rank and above outside the Liangzhou Pass to transfer their personal guards. That was how the Iron Stupa recovered to 4,000 riders in just 1 month. With a big halberd in his hand, Ningamei led the 4,000 iron cavalry to gallop wildly. He wanted to take a shortcut from the rear, straight to the area between the Old Woman Mountain and the corridor in the north. If the stone talisman was to block the southern dynasty's side cavalry's route to the south, Then he needed to cut off the Huang Songpu's main forces' route of retreat to the north. The last cavalry was a light cavalry in the absolute sense, full of elegance. Every one of them carried bows and light crossbows with quivers of arrows hanging on both sides of the saddle, and only a northern cold saber hanging from their waists. The arrows that peeked out of the quivers were white like 2 balls of snow. When the horses galloped, it was very beautiful. The main general Yuan Nanting led 20,000 white feather light cavalry straight to Crone Mountain. Think about it, when the wind rises, a round of concentrated fire from 20,000 cavalry would be like a majestic downpour, 20,000 raindrops falling on the enemy's head. The 8,000 elite cavalry that had already entered Gusai Prefecture suddenly turned around and went south. They passed through the border, drawing a diagonal arc as they galloped towards the corridor battlefield. A short and tired young general kept praying in his heart, "Don't die, don't die. They all say that you can't do anything more than 3 times. Even if you count the Battle of Miun Pass, you have only done it twice. King Yama will definitely not be willing to accept you. Fathers want to die, I don't care. But you, Xie Shibian, are the only one who wants to die. I have to beat you up." This person was Chao Wei. His nickname was Chao Benlei. Chapter 1965. The manor of Beifong was shrouded in a heavy atmosphere. Other than the 140,000 private soldiers under Dong Zhuo to surround Huayang Pass, he had also persuaded the Emperor of Beimang to mobilize 20,000 refugees who had lost their identities in the grasslands to participate in the assault on the outer walls of Huayang Pass. The insane Dong Zhuo had declared that he would use corpses to build a gentle slope to the top of the wall. The left and right cavalry led by Lu Dian and Li Yanchao had engaged in a series of small skirmishes with the vanguard of the Winter Thunder elite cavalry and the Ruan cavalry. Finally, a major battle had begun. On the 2 battlefields, Liang Mang's 4 cavalry armies had invested a total of 40,000 soldiers. Evidently, neither side had mobilized their full strength. The strength of the Beimang's Winter Thunder elite cavalry was unexpected, and the Ruan cavalry of 10,000 could not be underestimated either. Compared to the situation before Beifong, the casualties of the left and right cavalry armies were slightly greater. This meant that once they were entangled by the soldiers of Beimang, it would be very difficult for them to escape. Once this main force of Beiliang lost the flexibility of large-scale battlefield movements, other than the 10,000 Great Snow Dragon cavalry that could still fight and retreat, the 2 heavy cavalry armies that were destined to be unable to participate in large-scale battles alone would fall into an awkward situation. On the other hand, the middle army of Beimang, after the second battle line that Wang Yong and Helian Wei had built together, there was still a crown prince who was personally leading the troops. Beside this Beimang, who was second only to one person and above tens of thousands of people, other than the Palace Iron Cavalry Chieshui army that rarely appeared on the battlefield, there were also 2 heavy cavalry armies named after the surnames of Yelu and Murong. The battle strength of the heavy cavalry was indeed terrifying, but they greatly relied on the large-scale main force of the cavalry. This was like the 2-sleeved green snake of the sword god Li Chungang. It needed the support of a vast amount of qi, otherwise it would be a flashy dragon-slaying technique. This was the difficulty of the Beiliang Frontier Army resisting the entire army of Beimang. If the Beimang Frontier Army could send out another 100,000 cavalry soldiers, then the Beimang Frontier Army would definitely not choose Beiliang as the route south to the Central Plains. They would directly turn around and head towards the border between Liyang and Liao to fight to the death with Gudezhugua. They would even have the strength to send troops to Jizhou and follow the path that the grassland cavalry were most familiar with to enter the hinterland of the Central Plains. Or they could turn east and reach Tian City. However, in this way the situation in the world would not be as simple as the Beiliang cavalry lying on the side of the bed behind the Beimang cavalry. Instead, it would be leisurely watching the fire burning on the other side of the river, patiently waiting to reap the benefits of the fishermen. At that time, whether the Central Plains and the grassland would be surnamed Zhao or Murong would depend on the mood of the young king. Perhaps he might even change his surname to Su. In the study room next to the second hall's signing room, it was noon and the sun was high in the sky. It was unbearably hot. As a result, Chancellor Wang Yang Shenxing and Bai Yu were gathered in the small study room. Other than the deputy Jidushi Yang Shenxing who came to discuss military affairs, the rest of the people came here openly to escape from the heat. Although this study room was small, it was only the young vassal king who was dealing with official affairs. Although the 6 subjects' wing room was big, There were more than 10 or 20 people gathered together. The most important thing was that the administrator Li Darren had ingeniously helped to transplant a loquat tree in the courtyard outside the study room. The loquat tree was of moderate height. It had shade and would not block the light too much. Therefore, the small study room had unknowingly become an excellent summer resort. When Xianxia was discussing with the young vassal king, behind the spring and autumn period old general who was banished to the northwest border by Li Yong, Mr. White Lotus was sitting on a chair near the window and gently swaying his palm leaf fan. The cool breeze blew gently. Chancellor Wang shamelessly pulled Li Gongda to set up a battle array. After a round of beating, he could also rub against the cool breeze brought by Yu's fan. The young vassal king had already browsed through the detailed military intelligence reports. Today Xianxia didn't come here to repeat the same old tune, but rather because there was an enormous problem in front of North Jebei City, or perhaps all of northern Liang's northern Liang border army. Qingyuan Army's Stone Talisman Tribes Cavalry, Iron Stupa and White Feather Light Cavalry, these three cavalry armies as the most important mobile military forces outside of Liangzhou's pass, had already moved to Old Woman Mountain in Liuzhou. In that case, if the left and right cavalry failed to successfully devour Murong Baoding's main force of 60,000 elite cavalry, and were tightly bitten down by Wang Yong and Helian Wei, these two northern Mang's military commanders, what should North Jebei City do? It could even be said that this risky deployment of troops was very likely to lead to a tragic ending of mutual destruction between the two sides of Liang Mang. The main force of Huang Song's Pu tribe was destroyed in Laowu Mountain, but Baoyong would also lose the front line of Huayang Pass. Yang Xinxing worriedly said, "At that time, we did not expect that when Yu Wandao led the army to attack Xijing, Chao Wei's 10,000 cavalry also made a gesture of supporting Yu Wandao's Yuqi to the north. But Beimang unexpectedly only transferred the cavalry of Bo Wang Jingchong from the eastern front, which was confronting the two Liao's Liao, and then did not make any move. It seemed that they did not care about the safety of the southern dynasty's capital region. In the end, they even ordered the army to go south to reinforce Laowu Mountain. Could it be that the old lady has lost her mind and really does not care about the smoke of war rising in the entire Gusai prefecture? You have to know that Gusai prefecture borders two prefectures to the north. It has always been lacking in military strength, but it has a well-developed courier route. Once we win Laowu Mountain and join forces with Yu Wandao and Chao Wei's cavalry, Beimang is going to give away half of the southern dynasty with both hands? Su Fengnian did not dare to jump to conclusions. He only smiled bitterly and said, if it were the Liang emperor who cherishes his reputation, he would not dare to do so. If it were that old lady, it would be hard to say. Yang Xinxing frowned. Who will lose and who will gain by such an exchange? Is Beimang not afraid that our cavalry will destroy the southern dynasty, and they will not be able to recover their strength in 10 years and go south to the central plains? Chapter 1966. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, if it was in the past, the Liang imperial court still had control over the territory of the central plains. But now that the three kings have raised their armies, everything has become a variable. Beimang can certainly stake everything on this gamble. Su Fengnian gently held a piece of white jade the size of an egg in his hand and slowly stroked it. This piece of white jade was slightly red, its texture was delicate and it looked clumsy and simple. Su Fengnian could not bear to put it down. In fact, the item itself was not that rare. Compared to the fine jade that was carved into fine shapes, its price was as different as heaven and earth. However, the origin of this item was very interesting. Jiang Ni, Su Ying and Jia Jiajia had secretly carried a heavy cloth bag back to North Jebei City not long ago. Everyone's clothes were stained with dust and mud. They swaggered into this study room as if they were asking for credit. They opened the cloth bag and poured it onto the floor. Most of the items were ordinary pebbles that were playful and pleasing, mixed with some green jade that could barely be sold for a few copper coins. However, the three of them had really picked up a treasure. It was this piece of white jade that Su Fengnian had left on the desk to play with. Su Fengnian was very cunning. He squatted down and pretended to wantonly belittle the stone, saying that this was not worth a single copper coin and that the stone was just a cobblestone that would not even look good on the road. In the end, he sighed and picked up the piece of white jade with a beautiful color. He casually tossed it around and then took out 5 or 6 copper coins from his money bag and threw it to the little mud man covered in dust, saying that this was a friendly price. Although the little mud man was doubtful and felt that he had suffered a loss, He was still a fledgling in the field of business after all. He was shamelessly picked up by the young king. Logically speaking, such a fine piece of white jade should be worth at least 20 taels of silver if it was passed to a scholarly family in Gangnam-do. If it was carved by a famous jade craftsman, it would be even more difficult to say how much it would be worth. When the three girls finally left the study room, the new money pouch on Jiang Ni's waist, which had been shriveled since they arrived at North Rejecting City, finally had some vitality. Jia carried the heavy cloth pouch that had been filled with stones again and planned to make a small nest in the courtyard to play. Su Ying, on the other hand, was holding the copper coin that Jiang and I gave her. Everyone was happy. Yang Xinxing hesitated for a moment before finally lowering her voice to ask, "Dare I ask why Wang Yi is so determined to win the Battle of Luzhou? So much so that he didn't hesitate to mobilize the troops of the Qingyuan army to leave Liangzhou?" Su Fengnian suddenly tightened his grip on the piece of seed material in the palm of his hand, which was gradually heating up. He stared at this deputy Jidushi of Bailiang Road, who had a new lease of life after withered wood. Suddenly he joked, "Why don't you take a guess?" Yang Xinxing was caught off guard and did not know how to answer. After truly assimilating into Bailiang's officialdom, this veteran general also knew some interesting news about Bailiang that had not spread to the Central Plains and the capital. For example, the old prince of Liang, Su Xiao, liked to say, "Why don't you take a guess?" It was one of his catchphrases. Seeing the old man unable to hide his restraint and helplessness, Su Fengnian smiled and went straight to the point. There are many inside stories involved. For example, the crown prince of Beimeng once sent a message to me. Before Yelu Dongchuang left the Central Plains for the grasslands, he had a private meeting with me. There is also a long-term plan related to Hong Jia's escape to the north. It even involves the commander-in-chief of Beimeng's western front, Wang Sui, and that Gu Deziguo who is in charge of the two Liao provinces. If I really want to go into detail, I'm afraid I'll have to talk all night. I believe that General Yang is certain of one thing. On the battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass to the north of North Rejecting City, with the military strength of Liang Mang and the Bailiang cavalry, it is impossible for our Bailiang cavalry to obtain a complete victory in a frontal battle. At most it will be a Pyrrhic victory. Yang Xinxing nodded without hesitation. Su Fengnian gently placed the white jade document on the desk like a chess piece on a chessboard. When my master was alive, he always tirelessly told me that the depth of a national player's skill is always outside the chessboard. When I was young, I thought that my master always lost to my second sister in chess because he was looking for an excuse for his lack of strength. But as time passed, I realized that everything in the world is like chess, where victory and defeat must be determined. This is the truth. Su Fengnian slowly stood up and stretched out his finger to press on the seed material. When Su Xiao was in the most difficult situation in Liang in his early years, because he fought many tough battles that others were unwilling to fight, he didn't have many soldiers and horses under his command. Why were the big shots in Liang still willing to bet on Su Xiao? It's very simple. Su Xiao was always able to win a battle when almost everyone was not optimistic about him. This attracted the attention of the imperial court and made the old foxes who held the military seal in their hands feel that it was worth a bet. The inside stories I mentioned earlier, those national players hiding behind layers of curtains, were actually very fake. Both Bailiang and Bailiang are well aware that they won't act until they see the rabbit. There's no other way. Bailiang can only take an unconventional approach and make those people standing in front of the gambling table feel that it's time to sit down and gamble big. Otherwise, if they're too slow, they'll only be able to get some leftovers to fill the gaps between their teeth. Su Fengnian smiled. None of these guys have small appetites, so I have to let them see my sincerity. For example? Yang Xinxing subconsciously asked. For example? Su Fengnian said softly. For example, when the Iron Cavalry outside Liangzhou Pass defended Beiqing without losing it, the Liuzhou Cavalry won a great victory at Old Woman Mountain. Then they went all the way north and took Beimeng's southern capital, Xijing. Yang Xinxing was a grandmaster in both the imperial court and the battlefield, so he understood it immediately. However, this veteran who had experienced the war of spring and autumn did not feel relaxed at all. Instead, his heart became heavier. The young lord only said that he was going to defend Beiqing. Then what about the north of Beiqing? Huayang Pass, Liuyao, Fuling and Grave, 3 major military towns. Chu Lushan, Zhou Kong, Li Yanchao and Lu Dian for generals. No one knew when, except for the two people who were standing at the table next to each other. The rest of the people had left the study room. After Yang Xianxia also walked out of the study room, the young lord held the seed material and walked to the window. He looked up at the loquat tree. Although it was mid-autumn, the green was still lush. Spring, summer, autumn and winter leaves can grow green. Birth, old age, illness and death, people can't live forever. Chapter 1967. As soon as the autumn equinox passed, the battle situation outside Liangzhou Pass suddenly became tense. Previously, the scouts from both sides of Liangmang were roaming about outside the pass. Their forces were more or less equal. Although Beimang's Malanzi had the advantage in numbers, due to the battle on the Longyan Plains, the two elite scouts who were most familiar with the border army's terrain and had the most outstanding fighting power, Dongzhu's Crow Lanzi and Great General Lu Gui's Black Fox Lanzi, were almost completely wiped out. The Malanzi who followed the army to the south of Hutu City could not be said to be a headless fly, but compared to Liangzhou's second-class scouts, who were incomparably familiar with the terrain, they still did not have an advantage. Whenever the two sides encountered a sudden battle, Beimang's Malanzi was ordered to take the initiative to attack regardless of casualties. Many times they met on narrow roads. Even though Beimang's Malanzi was at a disadvantage in terms of military strength in some parts of the battlefield, they still charged bravely without fear of death, even if they had to sacrifice 3 for 1. The rich and overbearing Murong Baoding personally promised that as long as the Malanzi advanced to the front line, regardless of whether it was his direct subordinates or other troops, not only would they be able to obtain military merit by beheading the enemy, they would also be able to exchange their own losses for military merit. Under this kind of unreasonable and intense attack by Beimang, Beiliang's scouts never suffered heavy casualties in a single battle. However, after the losses accumulated time and time again, in a short period of 20 days, according to the intelligence reports from the left and right cavalry, more than 700 men had died in battle. The Liangzhou border army had no choice but to start gathering small groups of scouts, at the same time reducing the width and depth of the scouting line, decisively giving up on the risky move of sending a small group of scouts to roam in and out of the enemy's territory. Back then, Beiliang had chosen to place great importance on the Liuzhou battlefield and did not hesitate to shift their forces to the west. For example, Li Hanlin's white horse crossbowmen had all moved into Liuzhou. Not to mention the control Beiliang city had over the border defense line of Huaiyang Pass, Luya, Fuling and Grave. The connection with the left and right cavalry was growing thinner and thinner. This was definitely not a good sign. As the main force of the Beiliang border army, the left and right cavalry's main purpose was not to kill the enemy, but to link up Beiliang City and Huaiyang Pass defense line, preventing Beimang's cavalry from completely dividing the battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass. However, from the current situation, unless Murong Baoding was willing to hold his troops back, unwilling to lose the Winter Thunder elite cavalry and Ruran cavalry, slowing down the speed of his horse hooves and allowing the Liangzhou scouts to seize the opportunity to regain the initiative, from the perspective of the chessboard, the stalemate between the two sides was already set in stone. During this period of time, the northern Liang Dao's only official in the northern part of the city, the administrator Li Gongda, proposed to have Li Hanlin lead the remaining Liuzhou white horse crossbowmen back to the battlefield outside Liangzhou Pass. However, this proposal was rejected by both the young king and deputy Jidushi Yang Xianxia. The result of the magnificent cavalry battle at Old Woman Mountain in Liuzhou, which was destined to go down in history, had not yet been accurately reported to Jubiai City outside the Liangzhou Pass. The last urgent military document from a scout under Liangzhou's General Shifu was still neatly placed on the table in the small study next to the signing room. Even though they knew that the new Prince of Liang, who had accumulated great power and influence, valued the twin jade annulus of Great Chu, no less than the two trusted generals, Yu Luandao and Chao Wei, who were born in northern Liang, the military document written by Shifu himself was still straightforward, revealing the unique cruelty of a battlefield. Thank you to the monk soldiers of the Western Frontier Division for blocking the 50,000 cavalry with 15,000 infantrymen. Forgive me for not being able to rescue them. I will only follow the established plan to block the remaining Southern Dynasty's cavalry from going south. Joining forces with Ning Amei's 4,000 iron stupas, we will definitely block the Yellow Song's Pu tribe's main force from retreating north. Whether Beiliang's monk soldiers and Lantua Mountain's monk soldiers live or die, my Qingyuan army can't help. In fact, the true ruthlessness of the battlefield lay in Shifu's words. Even if my stone talisman army can rush to the corridor battlefield in time, as long as Bailiang's infantrymen still have the strength to block the Southern Dynasty's main force, then the Qingyuan army's cavalry will stop far away and choose not to rescue them. This was to prevent the Southern Dynasty's main force from giving up on rescuing Old Woman Mountain and decisively fleeing north, returning to the Southern Dynasty's main force. The young king did not summon the generals to discuss this matter in the conference hall. He did not even instruct the stone talisman to send it directly to the study room to browse and circulate. That evening, Su Fengyin sat quietly in the study room for a while and then wrote a letter to Liangzhou's general Shifu. The content of the letter was concise and comprehensive. It roughly talked about the follow-up of the corridor battlefield. Shifu, since you are a general of a province, you should act according to your discretion. There is no need to report everything to Bailiang City. When the young king finally stamped the King of Bailiang official seal on the large blank space of the letter, the counselor in green took the letter and hurriedly left. The young king sat alone in the study room and was silent for a long time. The night was as cold as water. The mansion in Bailiang City was still brightly lit. The sound of footsteps was like a drum, incessant. They were already used to it. Su Fengyin was in his study, staring at two maps of the situation on the table with Crone Mountain and Huayang Pass as the main focus. He suddenly raised his head and saw Yang Xinxing, great ancestor Gu, and Bai Yu walking over together. His expression was extremely solemn. Great ancestor Gu said with a hoarse voice, "We've just received news that Murong Baoding personally led the Winter Thunder Elite Cavalry and the Ruran Cavalry, each with a force of 20,000. Together with the 30,000 reinforcements from Wang Yong, the abbot of Aquarius State, they attacked Lu Diyuan's left cavalry of 24,000. Zhou Kong and Li Yanchao couldn't rescue them in time." Yang Xinxing said bitterly, "From the looks of it, the 10,000 Ruran cavalry that fought with Li Yanchao of the right cavalry was just a bait. The remaining 20,000 Ruran cavalry had already joined up with Murong Baoding's direct troops and were heading straight for the left cavalry. The so-called splitting of the troops into two directions, with the 30,000 Ruran cavalry attacking the right cavalry of Liang province, and Murong Baoding staying in the 20,000 infantry camp without moving, was all a pretense. In fact, the 20,000 infantry were pretending to be the Ruran cavalry, and in the end they joined forces with Wang Yong to attack the left cavalry." Su Fengyin's face turned slightly pale. He muttered softly, 20,000 Winter Thunder Elite Cavalry, 20,000 Ruran Cavalry, and 30,000 Aquarius Elite Cavalry, a total of 70,000 Beimang First-Class Cavalry. Yang Xinxing was about to speak when Bai Yu tugged at the sleeve of this veteran general, signaling him not to speak for the time being. The young vassal king who was sitting upright behind the desk slowly raised his head and asked, "How are the casualties of the Beimang barbarians?" Yang Xinxing tried his best to calm the intense emotions in his heart as he answered, "Murong Baoding did not send in all his troops at once. After the Winter Thunder Private Cavalry lost 9,000 men, he still did not retreat from the battlefield. Then he sent in 20,000 Ruran cavalry. Lu Dun, the left cavalry fought until Wang Yong's cavalry entered the battlefield. At that time the remaining Winter Thunder cavalry had no choice but to watch from the sidelines. There were almost no Ruran cavalry left on the battlefield. The Aquarius cavalry still lost 6,000 men. Only 800 left cavalry managed to break out of the encirclement and return to North Jebei City. The first deputy commander of the left cavalry, Lu Diyuan, and the other two deputy commanders all died in battle. In early autumn, there was once a left cavalry soldier who raised his arms to release eagles outside North Jebei City. The scene was still vivid in his mind. Grand Ancestor Gu suddenly said bluntly, "Since the left cavalry is gone, the right cavalry cannot hold the fort alone. They can no longer control the situation outside Liang Province Pass, which is north of North Jebei City and south of the Grave. Your Highness, you must not agree to Zhou Kong and Li Yanchao's request for battle." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "Immediately send an order to Zhou Kong and Li Yanchao. The right cavalry must do their best to avoid Beimang's main force heading south." Bai Yu said somewhat helplessly, "That Jean Partridge's military order has actually reached Jidushi Yang's barracks. From the commander to the 3 deputy commanders and all the captains, they have all signed a bloody handprint. They request to fight to the death and guarantee that they will at least wipe out Murong Baoding's Winter Thunder Cavalry and Wang Yong's main force. Su Fengnian stood up and said sternly, then add one more sentence. Tell Zhou Kong and Li Yanchao clearly that it is very easy for them to die. If they dare to disobey the orders of North Jebei City, I, Su Fengnian, will personally go outside the pass and wring their heads. Yang Xin, who had never seen a young king get angry in front of his face, was shocked. Grand Ancestor Gu sighed softly. Baiyu was calm and composed. He smiled and said, with North Jebei City's reply to the right cavalry, Old General Yang and I, the governor of Liang Province, will have an easier time. Chapter 1968. The three big shots of North Jiu quickly left with their own thoughts. Chancellor Wang, who was on duty in the ceremonial room, walked into the study with 2 pots of green ant wine. He saw that the young king had not yet sat down. He was standing behind the desk looking down at the 2 big seals on the table. One was naturally the world-famous Liang Wang seal, which was regarded as the most important small object in the world during Liang Yonghui's reign. In the past 20 years, as long as it involved more than 5,000 people in the northwest border, this seal had to be stamped. The shape of this seal was exactly the same as the current Zhao imperial court, imitating the style of Dechu of the Central Plains during the spring and autumn period. It was a jade seal and the strokes of the seal were even without any sharp edges. It had always been regarded as authentic calligraphy. But next to this Liang Wang seal, there was another seal that had long been withdrawn from Bailiang's officialdom. After the Su family's armored cavalry followed Bailiang's butcher Su Shao into Bailiang, this ancient bronze seal was habitually called the Great General's Seal. Occasionally, it would be seen in some important military inscriptions outside the pass. After heir Su Fengnian officially became the king of Bailiang, it completely disappeared from the border army's field of vision. The Great General's Seal was written in willow leaf script. The bronze seal was 3 cun 3 fin 9 fin thick, and shaped like a crouching tiger and coiling dragon. Now the Liang army's permanent general with real power, Wu Zhengjinping, had long switched to using the silver seal of the Qiding script, abandoning the knife-like willow leaf script. In fact, Mount Qingliang also had a big seal, mainly used for the promotion and dispatch of Bailiang's officials. Su Fengnian made an exception and left it to Deputy Administrator Song Dongming, allowing him to stamp the seal himself after the official document was approved, to show his superior position of sole power. After Chancellor Wang sat down, he opened 2 pots of wine and leaned forward to hand one to the young king. It was better to enjoy together than to enjoy alone. The old Confucian raised his head and drank a mouthful of strong wine, exclaiming in joy. Then he looked at Su Fengnian and said, I have heard about the left cavalry. Some words have accumulated in my stomach for almost 20 years and I have to spit them out. You don't have to say anything, just drink and listen to me. Su Fengnian sat back in his chair and nodded. This renowned scholar of the literary world, the leader of the scholarly circles, slowly said, I have always had 7 orifices and 6 orifices on the battlefield, but I know nothing about it. As a result, apart from bringing a few scholars to Bailiang, which can be considered a small contribution, I don't have any other achievements to show for it. I can only peacefully stay in the remote academies and study. In all these years I've secretly traveled to Bailiang many times and met Su Shao a few times. I've also met Li Yishan from Tide Listening Pavilion a few times. Su Shao is known for being a terrible chess player. His chess skills are among the worst in the world, but his ability to reverse his moves is top-notch. That's why I don't like to interact with him. Noticing the strange look on the young lord's face, the old master continued to say shamelessly, Li Yishan is a rare and extraordinary person. Of course he would be arrogant and treat me as his confidant. Su Fengnian finally couldn't help but say, that's enough. This old man choked on his wine and coughed a few times. The wine from the pot of green ant spilled all over his clothes. The old man casually patted his robe and said, Li Yishan, who is in seclusion on the top floor of Tide Listening Pavilion, stands too high and sees too far. That's why he inevitably feels lonely. Sages have been like this since ancient times, so it's impossible to escape. Every time I go there to visit, even though Li Yishan doesn't give me a good face, I know that this guy must be happy. There were a few times when he was drunk and Li Yishan would say some heartfelt words to me. He never talked about the Liang imperial court, but talked less about the strategist Su Shao and more about the northwest. At this point, this old man, who seemed to be taking advantage of his seniority, paused and drank a large mouthful of green ant wine. He first stuffed it in his mouth and then suddenly raised his neck and poured it into his stomach. His old body couldn't help but tremble. His weathered cheeks turned red. He continued, "As for the strategizing of the literati and the military strategy of the scholars, I don't accept Binshi of Liang, nor Nailan Yusi of Nanjiang, or even Huang Longsher. As for Zhao Chongling, who suppressed Li Yishan even after death, don't even mention him. As to why Zhao Chongling was more famous than Li Yishan both in life and in death, Li Yishan himself and Su Xiao, who knew better, both had their own difficulties. Li Yishan was born a poor scholar. Zhao Chongling, the grandson of the Dechu aristocracy, was more or less the Song family jade tree of the present Song Maolin in West Chu. When Zhao Chongling chose to assist the fallen Su Xiao, what was it? 800 servants in a grandiose manner. Can you imagine that? In any case, this old man is not willing to think about it. The more I think, the more envious I am. Su Xiao wants to win over the landowning households in the north and south of the river. Zhao Chongling is an eye-catching flag. Otherwise, would Su Xiao say something like, "The entire army can die in battle, but Mr. Zhao must live?" The old man smiled. Of course, Zhao Chongling is also very capable. Zhao Chongling contributed greatly to Su Xiao's destruction of the 6 countries in the later stages of the Spring and Autumn War. His reputation was so good that even the old emperor of Liang, Zhao Li, wanted to invite him into the court to be made a marquis. And Li Yishan? The old emperor Zhao Li never mentioned him. In reality, every time Su Xiao reported his military achievements, he praised Zhao Chongling greatly. His memorials were full of flowers, but as long as it was related to Li Yishan's schemes, he did not mention anything. "Why, do you know why?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "I only know that those beautifully worded articles were incited by Su Xiao, and then written by my master himself." The old man nodded. So the old emperor and Su Xiao are of one mind. Mr. Zhao, the Liang imperial court can use a hoe to poach people away. That Su Xiao admits defeat. But don't think about the unknown Li Yishan in court. Otherwise you will be crossing the line. Su Xiao may really start a rebellion. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Starting a rebellion is an exaggeration. My master was the first to oppose it." The old man snorted and glared. "Give an example, do you not understand?" Su Fengnian finally picked up the fragrant green ant wine and took a sip. "Old mister, please continue to give pointers." The old man suddenly asked, "What did I want to say at the beginning?" Su Fengnian put down the wine jug. "You too often talk about the Northwest." The old man suddenly understood. Yes. Li Yishan once told me a secret after he was drunk. He said that if Bailiang wanted to defeat Beimang in the worst-case scenario, they had to create a situation first. The old man stopped halfway through his deliberately mystifying speech. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked at the many objects on the desk. When the old man's gaze stopped on the seal of Prince Fengliang, Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Even if I was willing to give it to you, would you dare to accept it?" The old man's gaze shifted slightly to the bronze seal of the general, which now only had symbolic meaning. Su Fengnian glared at him angrily and said rudely, "Don't even think about it." The old man, who originally wanted to take advantage of the situation, was reluctant to part with it. He muttered regretfully, "That kind of willow leaf script that contains the style of the frontier fortress of Dafeng is not commonly seen." Then the old man raised his chin and saw the white jade seed material beside the young king's jug of green ant wine. His eyes lit up. This poor new Prince Fengliang actually left behind something that was worth a little bit of silver? Su Fengnian put away the seed material and sneered, "If Mr. Wang has the ability to snatch it away, then don't dream about it." The old man curled his lips. With Chancellor Wang's martial arts aptitude, even if he gave the old man 1,000 years of martial arts cultivation, it would still be useless to snatch something from a martial arts grandmaster. No young man would bully an old man like him. Su Fengnian gently held the white jade seed material and said straightforwardly, "Actually, I can guess what master said. The only chance for us Bailiang cavalry to win against Beimang is to first exhaust Beimang's top-class border army and grassland elite private army. Then even if Beimang exhausted its national strength, it would still be able to support the third great battle of Liangmang. However, at that time Beimang's hundreds of thousands of cavalry, compared to Lu Jinu who was guarding Hutu town, And compared to me who is guarding Jubai town, the Beimang cavalry that we are facing is actually just an embroidered pillow that looks good but is useless. From Dongzhi was private cavalry in the first great battle of Liangmang, to Yang Yuanzhan's direct cavalry in the mouth of the calabash, to Lu Gui's trusted cavalry, to the Chang cavalry in the second great battle, to the Ruan cavalry of Hong Jingyan and Murong Baoding's Winter Thunder elite cavalry, to the 20,000 cavalry of the Huangsong Puzhong army in Liuzhou, the cavalry of the Wanyan family in Longguan and so on. They are all on this list. Su Fengnian said calmly, for example, as long as we take down the Battle of Old Woman Mountain in Liuzhou, not only will we lose all of Gusai Prefecture's border army elites, we will also lose half of the southern dynasty. This is the potential advantage that the first great battle of Liangmang brought to Beiliang. The old man asked doubtfully, you mean to say that Beimang's peace order plan has a fatal flaw? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, you are only half right. The old man was confused and almost wanted to scratch his ears and cheeks. Su Fengnian thought for a moment, then picked up the wine pot and tilted it slowly, as if he wanted to place it horizontally in front of his eyes. Up until now, Beimang still has a greater chance of victory, but Beiliang has sacrificed so many people just to tilt this wine pot. When the time comes, the more powerful Beimang is, the more intense the collapse will be. The wine pot tilted more and more, and just as the wine was about to spill out of the pot, Su Fengnian gently put it back on the table. Su Fengnian suddenly said without reason, now I'm afraid that the old madam and the magistrate of Taiping are willing to throw away the broken jar. Not only the west capital but also half of the southern dynasty. They are determined to break into north resisting city. The old man's face was pale. He asked tentatively, Beimang won't be so crazy and decisive, right? Su Fengnian looked at the night sky outside the window and said, God knows. The old man only thought that the young king said it casually, but he didn't know that the words, God knows, were exactly the literal meaning. Tuoba inexplicably obtained the body of a celestial being, and his martial arts cultivation was close to Wang Xianji's peak. At the critical moment he even surpassed him. Since even Tuoba was so lucky, then wouldn't the old woman of Beimang who occupied half of the world's fate be even more blessed? Thunder and rain were all the grace of the monarch. It was also the will of God. Chancellor Wang took the empty wine pot and left. The young king stared at the map of the situation outside Liangzhou Pass that was spread on the table. At the same time, in a heavily guarded tent in Beimang, the candlelight that was as thick as a baby's arm swayed gently. The peace order stood in front of the table and looked down at a map of the situation of the 4 provinces of Beiliang. He chuckled and said, the chess players of the Central Plains all say that the golden horn, the silver border and the grass belly, is it true? Chapter 1969. The garrison troops outside the North Barbarian city began to evacuate the miscellaneous people in the market town. The scholars who carried books and traveled to study, recited poems and composed essays, and the heroes who rode their horses in the west wind with fairies, gradually returned to the south with the geese in the sky above their heads. At dawn, a group of more than 40 people was particularly eye-catching. They were all scholars from Xianxia Academy. They had elegant temperaments and were the best scholars in the world. After the caravan crossed the river south, a carriage stopped at the riverbank. 2 women, one big and one small, walked down. The girl had 2 braids and was holding a big fat white cat in her arms. The woman had a graceful figure and a stunning appearance. She was like a plump peony that stole the color of the country. She was in full bloom. She looked to the north. At the end of her vision was the southern city wall of the North Barbarian city. She could vaguely see the clanking of iron armor, but there was no king's robe. The little girl with braids, who was once praised by someone in Xianxia Academy as unparalleled fist technique and invincible leg technique, pouted and spoke up for her sister. Sister, you're a heartless and heartless man. What's there to miss? Humph. I must have been blind to think that he was a dog. In fact, he's not even as good as Xianxia, that idiot. The woman with the enchanting but cold aura was indifferent. The little girl pulled the big white cat's neck and raised her head to ask carefully, why don't we go to the gate of that mansion and scold him? Don't worry, as long as I do it myself I'll definitely scold that guy. What bullsh *T Grandmaster of Martial Arts? What #1 person in the world? None of them are my opponents. The older woman was Yu Yue, the teacher from Xianxia Academy. She rubbed the little girl's head and smiled gently. There are some things that you'd rather not fight for. You'll only cause trouble if you're restless. The little girl put her hands on her hips and threw the white cat to the ground. She raised her head and said, Sister Yu, how could there be such a magnanimous woman in this world? We are women. Alas, why didn't you personally go and ask? Why did you become a deserter at the last minute? What's going on? Didn't the history books always say that treacherous villains love to deceive the heaven? Perhaps that guy surnamed Su didn't even know that you had come to North Resisting City, and then you returned to the Central Plains in a fit of pique without saying a word. Didn't you end up being taken advantage of by those vixens who took over your nest? No, absolutely not. I must uphold justice for you. Just as the angry little girl took a step forward, Yu Yue grabbed one of her braids and gently pulled it back to its original position. The little girl frowned and said pitifully, You're really not going? Yu Yue smiled and said, There's no need to go. I know he knows that I've been here. The little girl was still angry. I don't care what you know or he knows. I just can't stand it. The saying that it's better to forget each other in Jianghu than to help each other in times of need. It's all a lie. How can it compare to the love between a scholar and a beauty? The little girl looked at Sister Yu, who was calm. The little girl, who didn't know what love was, began to cry. She gently kicked away the big fat white cat by her feet and raised her slender arm to wipe her tender face. She sobbed and said, No wonder my mother disliked the movie The First Snow the most. She always said that many of the words in the movie were too prophetic. It made all the women in the world unable to have the slightest bit of yearning. Especially the sentence, too much affection will always be ruined by ruthlessness, which is the most hateful. Her ancestors and parents were indeed learned scholars in Xianxia Academy. The little girl's speech was not very elegant, but it was definitely not comparable to the common children in the Central Plains. Suddenly, a cold voice sounded above the little girl's head. The first snow is full of nonsense. The sentence, May all the good people in the world become a beautiful couple, is the most hateful. Only the sentence, Too much affection will always be ruined by ruthlessness that you said is worthy of being called a piece of advice. 2 goat horn braids tilted backward. The little girl's eyes were hazy with tears. She blinked her watery eyes and looked up at the uninvited guest who seemed to have descended from the sky. The woman was tall and slender, just like the Mount Amay that was described in the travel notes of the literati. She was beautiful beyond compare. In the little girl's eyes, the fairy sister was dressed in purple and extremely beautiful. She had a sharp chin which was like an icicle hanging under the eaves during a heavy snowfall. The little girl didn't know why she fell in love with this sister in purple at first sight. However, she was very afraid of her and felt very conflicted. Yu Yue asked politely, neither friendly nor distant, May I know why the leader of the Xianyuan Alliance has suddenly come to visit? Hearing the name leader of the Xianyuan Alliance, the eyes of the girl with the goat horn braids lit up. She really didn't lose to the civil and military officials. After hearing the name Emperor, she mustered up her courage and took a step forward. She sneakily stretched out 2 fingers and secretly pinched the corner of the fairy sister's clothes. Then she turned around and said with a face full of joy, Sister Yu, the purple clothes on her must be like the rumors in Jianghu. They are made from the silk spat out by the ice silkworms on the peak of Mount Kunlun, the ancestor of the dragon bloodline. They are smooth and soft and very comfortable to touch. It is said that they are invulnerable to weapons and water and fire. This dress alone is priceless. Our leader of the Xianyuan Alliance spent half of the Great Snow Plateau's financial resources to invite a reclusive Mahas scholar to make 4 pieces. She wears 1 each in the spring, summer, autumn and winter. When she goes out she flies here and there. When she passes famous mountains and rivers her feet never touch the ground. She flies past with a whoosh. In the distance, the young scholars who had heard of Xianyuan Zi's name for a long time but had never seen her in person were fascinated by her extraordinary elegance. They secretly compared the leader of the Wulin Alliance with Master Yu. On the other hand, they sincerely admired the courage of the boy with the goat horn braids. Everyone knew that the leader of the Xianyuan family had an extremely strange temper. He was even more temperamental than those incapable rulers who were cursed in the history books. They were all worried that the little girl would be smashed into pieces by Xianyuan Qingfeng's slap. These scholars had traveled all the way west to the border of Bailiang and had interacted with the little girl day and night. In addition, they had spoiled the little girl in the academy. Even though they were extremely afraid of Mount Huishan Zi's fierce reputation, There were still 7 or 8 people who walked forward together. However, Xianyuan Qingfeng only glanced at them from the corner of his eyes, and those scholars who were full of righteousness involuntarily retreated. In an instant they were all drenched in sweat. No wonder there was a famous Jianghu big shot who joked that there were countless beautiful pomegranate dresses in the world, but Mount Huishanzi's dress was the most difficult to kneel to. If one wanted to kneel or dared to kneel, they had to have the ability to do so. The little girl who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth suddenly added fuel to the fire and patted the purple dress. Then she jogged in front of everyone and laughed loudly. She said proudly, "You all saw it. I've already exchanged blows with Mount Huishanzi. How about it? When I said that I've exchanged blows with Su Fingyan in the academy, you all didn't believe me. Now you should believe me, right?" Everyone was dumbstruck. Some of the timid young scholars had already begun to wipe off their cold sweat, afraid that they would witness a bloody and cruel scene in the next moment. Yu Yue said softly, "She's just a child. Her words carry no harm. I hope that the leader of the Xianyuan alliance will forgive her." Xianyuan Qingfeng glanced at the little girl who had her back to him. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, but he quickly restrained himself. He turned to Yu Yue and said softly, "Don't worry. I won't lower myself to the same level as a child." Yu Yue felt relieved. Her stiff body gradually softened. Obviously, her heart was not as calm as her face. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was only one paper away from becoming an immortal on Earth, naturally saw this clearly. However, he was too lazy to care about it and even more disdained to care about it. Ever since this woman made her debut, she had never lacked news about Jianghu, and every time she did, it would shock the world. Most recently, it was related to the Tai-Bai sword sect, which had recently risen to become one of the top 10 sects in Liang. That banished immortal Qin Tianyuan arrived at the foot of Mount Wudong, but did not participate in the Wudong Martial Arts Symposium. On his journey to the Central Plains, he unfortunately encountered Zi, who had long been famous in the world. It was rumored that the momentum of that unexpected encounter could be said to be earth-shattering, caused half of Hezhou to tremble and the mountains to shake. It was said that Qin Tianyuan took 17 breaths and consecutively struck with his sword 3,000 times. In the night, the sword light illuminated half of Hezhou as if it was daytime. After this battle, the banished immortal Qin Tianyuan's reputation did not fall. Instead, it skyrocketed. Xianyuan Qingfeng was even catching up with the new Prince Liang. Those who flattered Mount Huishan believed that the title of number 1 in the world would only be known after the battle. Those who were neutral also felt that it was the worst. This female alliance chief was able to enter the ranks of martial arts grandmasters and become the high and mighty 5th person, behind Beimang's Huyan Temple. Xianyuan Qingfeng put his hands behind his back. Together with Yu Yue, he looked to the north toward the majestic border city that had yet to be completed. The northwest sky was high and the wind was strong. The two women's sleeves fluttered in the wind. Xianyuan Qingfeng looked to the front and suddenly sneered. "That Su fellow is willing to let such a magnificent scene slip by?" Yu Yue only felt that it was shrouded in fog. She did not know what Mount Huishanzi was planning. Xianyuan Qingfeng finally said, "Whether you fight or not, it depends on your mood. You have to be clear with your words. Don't beat around the bush. You only feel that the other party has failed to live up to your deep feelings and good intentions. In fact, you only have yourself to blame." Yu Yue dismissed it with a smile. When Xianyuan Qingfeng's figure flashed and disappeared, this Mr. Ji Shang of Shangyin Academy muttered to himself, "You are not me and I am not you." A purple rainbow fell into North Jiebei City. The little girl with ponytails who had picked up the big white cat again, looked to the sky. Her eyes were dazzled. She clicked her tongue in wonder and said, "So domineering, so powerful. When I grow up, I want to be like this too." When Yu Yue got on the car and leaned over, she finally realized what Xianyuan Qingfeng meant by the magnificent scene. She smiled helplessly. Chapter 1970. She remembered that in the past there was a prodigal son who joked that if he lowered his head to look, he would not be able to see the tip of his feet. Now that Yu Yue remembered it, she did not think it was ridiculous or funny. Instead, she felt a little bitter. These words, even if she stopped him in the past, he would have said it. Now that she asked him to say it, she was afraid he was not in the mood to say it. It was unknown when it started, but in the mansion of the vassal king, many high-ranking officials, especially the military counselor, would jog around the outside of the walls of the vassal king's mansion 3 times every morning, and then they would practice boxing together on the open space in front of the conference hall and the 6th department's wing room. It was said that the boxing style was created by the previous Wudong cult leader Hong Xixiang. After the young vassal king's deletion and integration, it was simplified from the orthodox 108 styles of the big frame of Wudong Mountain to the small frame of 36 styles practiced by the people of the vassal king's mansion. The essence was still there, and it reduced a lot of the cumbersome postures that were not easy for the ordinary people at the foot of the mountain to perform. The movements alternated between fast and slow, like moving clouds and flowing water, which was most suitable for stretching the muscles and bones, consolidating the foundation and nourishing the qi. Over time, led by Chancellor Wang of the ceremonial chamber and Song Chongsui of the workshop, they took the initiative to participate in the morning running and practicing boxing together with the officials of the vassal king's mansion. Bai Yu of the household chamber, because of his weak eyesight, would also stand under the eaves of the wing room every day, smiling and squinting his eyes at each other. Because the official Li, the administrator, personally led the official Li, was a group of dragons without a leader, Li Gongda developed the habit of going to the top of the city wall every day before dawn. Li Gongda, as the role model of the older generation of civil officials in Bailiang, although he could sit on the sand pile and chat with the bumpkin craftsmen who built the city, he was unwilling to mingle with a bunch of younger generation in the officialdom. Therefore naturally he would not mix with them. The officials of the official Li also gave up, and the officials on duty of the military and penal departments did not need to exercise their bodies, so they also did not join in the fun. But even so, the morning of the vassal king's mansion already gave people a kind of lively atmosphere. Today the young vassal king accompanied Mr. White Lotus to stand at the top of the stairs, watching more than 200 people practicing boxing together. Among them was the pair of Lu Qingsong and Lu Qingqing. Lu Qingqing did not follow the head of the family Lu Dongjiang back to Guanyi Lingzhou, but instead stayed in North Jiu, to become a temporary rank to rank. The leader of the martial artist mansion was Wudong Zhenren Yu Xingrui, who had just entered to the city to be to the Guanyi Lingzhou, to be. The 3 grandmasters leisurely practicing boxing together in the open space of the vassal king's mansion. Perhaps it was not an exaggeration to say that it was an unprecedented grand occasion. Bai Yu, who stood side by side with the young vassal king, looked straight ahead and said with a smile, "Your Highness, in addition to the 3 in front of you, according to the intelligence of the torture chamber, the 3 grandmasters of Nanjiang, Mao Shulang, Qing Baishuang and Ji Lu, and are also on their way to North Jiu. It seems that the number 1 master of Nanzhao, Wei Miao, did not follow his wife back to her hometown after leaving the mountain. Most likely they are also coming to North Jiu. Although the blind Shishuguqin master Shuesongguan is missing, but Han Laoshan also sent a secret message to Laziku at the border of Lingzhou. This woman also did not follow the former crown prince of Western Shu, Su Su, to the south. As for the likes of Jin Qiu Dao Manor Master Tong Shanquan and the Snow House Spear Saint Li Chongho, there are also more than a handful of people coming here to join in the fun. Your Highness, are you planning to hold a new martial arts assembly for the head of the Huishan family in Great Snow Plateau? Su Fengyan shook his head and said, after joining in the fun, everyone will go back home. What else can I do? Can I persuade these martial arts grandmasters to go to the battlefield to kill the barbarians? Didn't your junior brother, Xianxia, say that he will go to the Earth Lung Mountain immediately? Moreover, killing enemies on the battlefield has nothing to do with Jianghu. Mr. White Lotus shamelessly retorted, if I remember correctly, during the 10-year siege of Xiangfan City, countless Jianghu warriors helped Wang Mingyang to resist your Su family's troops. Su Fengyan helplessly said, yes, Mr. White Lotus is right. Bai Yu jokingly said, I'm not the transport commissioner who dares to punch your highness. So your highness doesn't need to be so careful to please your highness. Su Fengyan laughed with a fake smile. It was obvious that he had learned most of the essence from Jia. Bai Yu, you're lucky that you're not a Jianghu person. Otherwise I'd have to exchange pointers with you. Bai Yu suddenly changed the topic and asked softly, can I ask about the movements of Groom Yu and Lu Huang, Wang Xinji's 2 disciples? Su Fengyan didn't hide anything and said, Lu Huang is by Li Hanlin's side. As for Groom Yu, you guess. Bai Yu's heart beat faster. Then it's the same as Su Yanbing, who is hiding in Huayang Pass. I understand. Your Highness, there's something I don't know if I should say. Su Fengyan didn't leave any leeway and said, I advise you not to say it. Bai Yu turned his head and pretended to be surprised. What? Is there someone who dares to publicly beat up a provincial governor in front of everyone? Moreover, he's the provincial governor of Liangzhou, the only provincial governor in the 30 provinces north and south of Liang. Su Fingyan still chuckled. It's a pity that Mr. White Lotus doesn't practice the sword. Bai Yu smiled knowingly and didn't continue to ask. He originally wanted to ask if Xie Bian, even though he had Groom Yu by his side, had still died in battle in that corridor, then Su Fingyan, the king of Beiliang, wouldn't have a grudge against the general of Liuzhou Ko Jianghuai. After all, Bai Yu, Yang Shenxing and Ko Jianghuai were all people on the same mountain. Just like how the deputy administrator Song Dongming had a close relationship with Wang Linquan, nicknamed Beiliang's god of fortune. It was also like how Qin Shiliang and Yang Guangdou had a close relationship with the Liuzhou army, while Su Beiji was friendly with Han Laoshan of Lingzhou and Huang Fuji of Yuzhou. The process was different, but the result was the same. Gentlemen made friends, not parties. Scholars gathered together to form a forest. That was just an elegant way of saying that scholars paid more attention to. How about Zhang Julu as an official? He was almost flawless and close to a saint. However, beside him was Tantanon and Huan Wen. Behind him was Zhao Yiling, Wang Xiongui, Yin Maochun, Yuangua and Han Lin, who were important officials from Yonghui's spring. 30 years of cultivation on the mountain. In the end, it was just cultivating the heart. After Bai Yu left the mountain to become an official, he saw things more clearly than many of the old foxes who had been in the officialdom for decades. That set of Wudong fist techniques, even if an outsider used it, would still be pleasing to the eye. Bai Yu sighed. If one could change to a Taoist breathing technique, whether it was the entry chant of the Taoist temple of Longhu Mountain, the song of returning to the truth, or the Heart Sutra of Wudong Mountain's Jade Pillar Peak, it would allow one's body and spirit to merge, both on the outside and inside. Not to mention how to prolong one's life, it can always cure diseases and strengthen the body. Su Fingyan nodded. If you and I have a chance in the future, you should take the lead to promote your position as the provincial governor of Liangzhou. I will help you say hello to Wudong Mountain. Bai Yu suddenly felt a gust of wind blow from the side. Before seeing the face, he heard the voice. The voice was cold like the winter snow. Wudong Mountain's Jade Pillar Heart Sutra is hard to say. Can Longhu Mountain's song of returning to the truth be taken out? Even Mount Huishan's last guest elder disdains it. Bai Yu looked hard and saw a slightly blurry face. However, the dazzling bright purple color confirmed it. Bai Yu immediately smiled bitterly and kept quiet out of fear. Mr. White Lotus was rarely afraid of anyone. For example, he was not afraid of Su Fingyan at all. This young vassal king seemed to be incomparably arrogant, but in fact he was the most reasonable when facing people who were willing to be reasonable. However, Bai Yu also knew that there were many strange things in this world. There were indeed a small group of people who completely did not like to be reasonable. Coincidentally, the woman beside Bai Yu belonged to this small group of people. She was the most unreasonable one. Every time they exchanged letters, Zhao Ningxian, the current leader of the Dragon Tiger Mountain, who lived in seclusion in the Earth Lung Mountain, the first blessed enclave of Taoism, would complain in the letter about how arrogant and rude the young woman surnamed Shenyuan of Mount Hui was. To be able to make Zhao Ningxian, a Taoist priest who was easy to talk to, comment like this, Mount Huishanzi could be considered as a heavenly unreasonable person. After Mount Huishan's reputation soared, first of all, Mount Longhu's pilgrims were not allowed to go up the mountain to burn incense on the 1st and 15th day of the lunar month. Second of all Taoists surnamed Zhao of Mount Longhu were not allowed to come within 10 miles of Mount Huishan. Third of all, no Taoist priest of Mount Huishan was allowed to enter her site. In addition to these 3 prohibitions, she also let people swagger away dozens of ancient trees that were at least 300 years old from Mount Longhu. Among them there were 4 osmanthus trees and 3 ancient cypresses. After that, she did not forget to let people leave a bag of broken silver, which was less than 10 taels of silver at most. If she was in a bad mood or bored to death, she would even throw a few large objects at Mount Longhu for no apparent reason. Although she didn't hurt anyone, every now and then a huge object would fly over her head, smashing a huge hole in the ground. As a cultivator who would be able to endure the peace and quiet on the mountain. However, Bai Yu was even more well aware that the most painful part of Zhao Ningxian's complaint was the sloppiness in the depths of the heart of the young leader of Longhu Mountain. Yearning had long been raised, but there was no place to settle. A cultivator had a sword of wisdom in his hand, and the threads of love were easy to cut. Unfortunately, some people were unwilling to cut. Mount Huishan's Taoist master mansion was too close to Mount Huishan's Great Snow Plateau. Only Mount Huishan was neither far nor near. It was just right. Why did Zhou Xian, who was known for his good fortune and was known to be ancient since childhood, have to be so difficult to the new Prince Liang? Was it only because of the previous generation's grievances? Was it only because Su Xiao led the army to trample Mount Longhu? Of course not. At this time, when Bai Yu thought of the young leader of Mount Huishan's sorrow and helplessness, he could not help but feel a little sad. After hesitating for a moment, he looked at the woman and finally could not help but directly say, "Leader Xianyuan, do you know Zhou Xian?" Chapter 1971. Xianyuan Qingfeng's expression was indifferent as he interrupted Mr. White Lotus and sneered, "You want to say that he likes me? I've known for a long time. I'll have to trouble Mr. White Lotus to pass a message to this guy hiding in Earth Lung Mountain. Tell him to come talk to me face to face if he has the ability. Then I'll let him know how the word regret is written." The young vassal king who had a grudge with the chief of Mount Longhu didn't hide his unperturbed expression at all. If there was a desk in front of him, he would probably slap the desk and shout, "Amazing." Bai Yu facepalmed and remained silent. After today's incident, Mr. White Lotus wouldn't dare to be frank with Zhou Xian in the letter even if he was beaten to death. Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned and asked, "You're just a little provincial governor. Is it really appropriate for you to stand side by side with a vassal king?" Perhaps everything had its vanquishing factor. Bai Yu took a deep breath and turned to leave. He sighed deeply, probably lamenting that public morals were deteriorating day by day and that women were as fierce as tigers. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at the young girl who was sitting on the edge of the roof with her legs crossed. He winked at her and signaled with his eyes. The girl only chuckled. Compared to Su Fengnian's gloating over Zhou Xian's misfortune, she was clearly gloating even more. Su Fengnian knew that the narrow-minded little clay figurine had 3 thresholds that could not be said to be too high, not too high, not too low, not too low, and not too high either. In this lifetime she would never be able to cross the threshold. One of the thresholds had something to do with the princess making things difficult for the princess. But previously, when Su Fengnian worked hard to help the princess earn so many copper coins on Mount Wudong, he had already slightly let go of this matter. The second threshold was related to a certain illusion of leaning against the wall. Chancellor Wang, who had leaked the heavenly secret, had already suffered. During that period of time when the young vassal king had nothing to do, he would play chess with the old man who couldn't control his mouth. He would beat the old man until he threw away his helmet and armor. He beat the old man so much that he almost vomited blood when he saw the chess set and box. The third threshold was related to moving books and sending books. All these years, the little clay figurine had always felt that the most difficult thing in the world was moving books like moving a mountain. However, a certain someone actually sent large boxes of secret manuals to the great snow plains of Mount Hui. Just now, Su Fengnian had already accepted his fate when Su Fengnian barged into the north resisting city. Presumably, Jiang and I had already been alerted. It was already fortunate that he did not see the flying sword kill anyone. Su Fengnian's attempt to bribe Jia was nothing more than a last-ditch struggle. Xianyuan Qingfeng turned a blind eye to this and stood proudly at the top of the stone steps. Of course, she knew that there was a West Chu girl named Jiang and I in this manner. She asked softly, "How do you think one is doing now?" Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment and was silent for a moment. "I think about it occasionally, but I don't dare to think too much about it." She added, "If there's a chance in the future the 3 of us can get together? Back then I didn't beat him up hard enough. It's a pity." Su Fengnian grinned. "All right, but I'll say this first. When the time comes, I'll definitely stop you." She narrowed her eyes slightly and raised her chin slightly. She laughed softly. "It doesn't matter if we win or lose. Regardless, that stingy one has to treat us to a drink and rip him off." Su Fengnian nodded. "I definitely won't stop you." Xianyuan Qingfeng looked around. "I'll just find a place to stay. When I want to return to the Central Plains, you don't have to send me off. I reckon you won't be able to take care of me then. When I get back, I'll help you find that one guy first. No matter how big the Jianghu is, it's still mine." Su Fengnian said softly, "Thanks." Xianyuan Qingfeng dismissed it with a smile and disappeared. She came and went without a trace, like a swan goose stepping on snow. Her figure appeared below the northern wall of North Resisting City, and she walked slowly. May all the lovers in the world be together. She had said this to another girl before, and it was the most hateful sentence. However, she had never said it, and it was also the most hopeful sentence. Su Fengnian stood silently where he was. When he came back to his senses, he realized that everyone in the square was looking at him with different expressions. Even the sword grandmaster Cai Qingshan was whispering to the Wudong Zhenren Yu Xingrui, and his eyes were especially obscure and playful. Su Fengnian could do nothing about it, and he didn't want to explain further. It was tantamount to giving away 300 taels of silver here. When Su Fengnian arrived at the front yard of the second hall, he saw Deputy Provincial Governor Yang Shenxing standing beside a one-armed old man with white eyebrows, white hair and white clothes. Su Fengnian glanced at the old man, who looked more sage-like than a Daoist immortal hanging on a statue. He was also very distressed. Suishigu, last time at Mount Qingliang, I've already let you eat 3 famous swords in one go, including the Thunder of Thousand Gullies. Even if this North Resisting City is turned upside down, there won't be any swords to your liking. Take it that I'm begging you, don't make trouble. The ancestor of Eating Sword, whose long white eyebrows almost reached his knees, twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. How could you not know that this old man has been coveting the 2 swords of Fuji and Shudao in Tide Listening Pavilion for a long time? This old man is heading north this time because he wants to make a deal with you. This old man will help you kill 2,000 Beimang barbarians outside the pass, at least 2,000 of them. In return, you will give the 2 swords of Fuji and Shudao to this old man. What do you think? Su Fengnian flatly refused. I've said it before. My second sister has been in love with those 2 swords since she was young. She couldn't even bear to take them out of Tide Listening Pavilion. That's why she brought the Red Stallion to Shangyin Academy to study. Even if I'm willing to exchange the 2 swords, do you think I dare? Suishigu mocked. Indeed. Even if I lend Su Fengnian 100 times more courage, he wouldn't dare. Su Fengnian walked closer and said in a low voice, although the 2 swords of Fuji and Shudao are among the top 10 swords in the world, there are still 8 other swords in the Central Plains. I'll get you swords that are not inferior to these 2 swords. What do you think? Suishigu sneered. It's hard to say if you'll live past the end of this autumn. Where do you get the confidence to help this old man get swords from the Central Plains to Beiliang? Su Fengnian naturally put his arm around Suishigu's shoulder and said, that's easy. If you can't get 2 swords of the same level as Shudao, I'll use 20 swords that are slightly inferior to them in exchange. Tide Listening Pavilion still has 7 or 8 swords left. If you ask the Fish Dragon Gang in Beiliang to work hard, I'll be able to get 20 swords. What do you think? As long as it involved business, the young king didn't put on airs and didn't care about his face. Suishigu shook his shoulder and shook off the young king's arm. Then he stretched out 2 fingers and twisted his snow-white eyebrows. He narrowed his eyes and pondered, weighing the pros and cons Su Fengnian struck while the iron was hot. He said, Senior Xianxia, you see, there are so many grandmasters from the Central Plains in North Resisting City. Later on, there will be more grandmasters coming here. It shouldn't be hard for me to find a chance to ask them for some good swords. In short, I'll make sure you have a few dishes to go with your wine. What kind of friendship do we have? We fought side by side in the past and exchanged our lives with Cat Han Xian. We're like old friends. Don't you trust me, Su Fengnian? Suishigu stopped at the door of the study and turned to look at the young king. Trust you? Why don't you trust that old woman with the surname Tantai? Su Fengnian gave him a thumbs up. Senior Xianxia, you're indeed a distinguished figure of the same generation as Lu Songtao of Zhulu Mountain. You have guts. Even I don't dare to call Tantai Pingjing old woman. Deputy Provincial Governor Yang couldn't bear to look at them, let alone listen to them. He strode away. Chapter 1972. Suishigu scolded in a low voice. This old man admits defeat. At such a young age, his skin is even thicker than my stomach that is filled with hundreds of famous swords. The young vassal accepted it calmly and smiled. Senior, you flatter me, you flatter me. After the 2 entered the study room, Suishigu could not stand the young vassal's pretentious attentiveness. He decisively moved a chair and sat down. This was because he knew that the more attentive this bastard named Su was, the more likely he would suffer in the future. Suishigu restrained his expression and asked, Is the left cavalry really gone? Su Fengnian sat behind the desk and nodded. Suishigu frowned. Is the right cavalry going to join forces with the Great Snow Dragon cavalry to block them, or are we going to let the Beimang army go straight to North Jebei City? Su Fengnian didn't beat around the bush, directly saying, even if we don't stop them, we won't be able to stop them. Instead of wasting our main force in a meaningless battle, we might as well just let the northern Mang barbarians pile up corpses outside North Resisting City. As long as we can make it through this autumn and winter, when next spring arrives, especially when spring turns to summer, the northern Mang cavalry's days will become more and more difficult to endure. Sui Xiegu laughed. You actually want to reduce the pressure on Huayang Pass Fatty Chu, right? Su Fengnian did not answer immediately. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Jianghu had been around for 100 years, and its age was comparable to the later Sui, which was China's shortest age. The old man's long years of experience should not be underestimated. Sui Xiegu looked around at the simple study that did not have a single piece of furniture on top of the desk. He sighed slightly and said, "It's not easy to be a vassal king with real power like you." Su Fengnian laughed and waved his sleeves, one shoulder bright as the moon, two sleeves clean as the wind, and four bare walls. My name will definitely go down in history. Sui Xiegu mocked. To think that you can still laugh. Don't you think you've lost your father's face? Su Fengnian folded his hands in his sleeves and leaned back in his chair. He smiled faintly. No matter how useless my son is, no matter how disappointed Su Shao is, he can't scold me to my face. Sui Xiegu's mouth twitched, but he did not comment. After a long time he slowly said, I have lived for so many years, but my impression of the Beimang barbarians is not deep. However, compared to many of the people of the Central Plains who have only experienced the fires of war during the spring and autumn period, I have personally witnessed the cavalry of the grassland on a large scale. At the time I was only 20 years old and happened to be traveling through Jizhou with a sword on my back. I was at a place where the north and south intersected. In the old northern Han history books, it should be called the Great Pass. As for how the current Liang Imperial Court is named, I do not know. The old man's tone was gentle, without any heavy or intense emotions. I saw several thousand cavalry gallop into the pass. I Sui Xiegu am not a citizen of northern Han. Moreover, I have never had much of an interest in my country. My ambition is to reach the peak of the path of the sword, not caring about worldly affairs. I have even less interest in the struggle for hegemony and the change of the country's surname. As a result, at that time, I did not hot-bloodedly charge into the pass with my sword alone. However, there is a small matter that you may not have seen. At that time I saw jackals and wolves with full bellies on the side of the road, just like the fat rich men of peaceful times. When those beasts saw people, they actually didn't retreat and instead barked. At that time I did not feel much about it. I only felt that the weak were prey to the strong, and that it was only right and proper. On the contrary, it made me even more determined to pursue the path of martial arts. However, when I think back to that scene, I feel somewhat uncomfortable. This was actually the reason why the young vassal king did not have the extravagant hope that the Grand Masters of the Central Plains would remain in North Resisting City. Just as Sui Xiegu had said, thousands and tens of thousands of people had died tragically under the trampling of the steppes' iron hooves. Their heads and stomachs had been sliced open by war blades. Their corpses had been lifted into the air by spears, and their bodies had been pierced through by bows. No matter how many people died, in the eyes of the Jianghu experts who hoped to seize the championship of martial arts, the same scene in the eyes of the border soldiers and in the eyes of the grandmasters of Jianghu was like the difference between heaven and earth. Perhaps some people were not like the young swordsman Sui Xiegu. They would choose to stand up and take the initiative to intercept and kill the steppe cavalry. However, in the end they would retreat in the face of difficulties. Although he had the 3-foot sword by his side, he chose to watch coldly from the side. Even though he had the 3-foot sword, he still hid his sword in its scabbard. Until now he only felt uncomfortable. Su Fengnian could not do it. It was not necessarily because Su Fengnian was more benevolent than Sui Xiegu. It was only because he was born in the Su family and had followed the cripple's surname since childhood. Perhaps it was not at the border of Beiliang. If it was somewhere else, such as Jizhou or the two Liao provinces, if Su Fengnian was only a grandmaster of martial arts who did not participate in the invasion of Beimang from the south, he would also be the same as some of the grandmasters of Jianghu. He would only fight to his heart's content and then retreat in the face of difficulties. He would not have the unyielding determination to retreat. Tai Qingshan Shuesongguan Wei Miao Mao Shulang Qingbai Shuang Jilu and so on. These Grand Masters of the Central Plains were already in North Resisting City or were about to enter North Resisting City. Why would Su Fengnian want them to die outside the border of Liangzhou and resist the hundreds of thousands of Beimang's cavalry with their flesh and blood? Sui Xiegu, who was resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and broke the silence. He said in a low voice, "Heaven can create all things and also kill all things. Su Fengnian, are you really not afraid?" Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Did Tantai Pingjing say this?" Sui Xiegu did not admit or deny it. Sui Xiegu stood up and walked to the window. His burly figure seemed lonely. The old man mocked himself. "In terms of swordsmanship and sword will, I used to think that I would not lose to anyone. But strangely I have never liked carrying a sword. Instead I like to eat swords. Perhaps Li Chungang was right. I am not a swordsman. Then what am I? I've lived to this age yet I'm still asking myself this question. What a joke." Before Sui Xiegu left the study room, Su Fengnian proposed a new deal. After a moment of shock, the ancestor of Eating Sword did not refuse or agree. He strode away. After the old man walked out of the study room, he walked slowly in the corridor. Suddenly he turned his head and looked at the lush loquat tree in the courtyard. Not long after, the young king also left the study room. He handed a secret letter that he had just written to one of the leaders of the torture room. The two of them walked out of the room together. The young king said with a calm face, "After you hand the letter to him, tell him that if there is such a day, I, Su Fengnian, am begging him to do this." The old spy gritted his teeth and did not say a word. He just nodded vigorously. Then he quickly left the mansion and left North Resisting City. Su Fengnian stood on the steps and quietly looked into the distance. The autumn wind blew silently. Beimang's army was about to arrive at North Resisting City. Someone was preparing for his death. The young king turned around gently and looked up to see He and Su Ying sitting side by side on the roof. He made a face at them. Chapter 1973. Deep into the night, there was a porcelain oil lamp in the upper left corner of the study, imitating the style of the old Western shoe porcelain lamps. The lamp was hidden in the lip orifice and could be filled with water. The young man sat alone behind the table, reading a secret letter that he was already familiar with. He had been to the rich Gangnam-do where the rich and noble families lived. Their houses were tall and bright, showing a peaceful and prosperous atmosphere. He had also been to the Great Peace City. Every festival, every street in the capital would have lotus lanterns. The lights stretched out and the candlelight was like an army marching in the night. It was the most spectacular sight. He had also seen the twinkling stars in the small town at night and the lights were still dim. When he passed by small and big villages, it was a pleasant surprise to see an extremely small light. He put down the letter, got up, walked around the desk, came to the window and gently pushed the window open. The letter was not an important military document, but a private secret letter that Li Yanchao had submitted to North Jiebei City. However, it did not pass through the military office of North Jiebei City, but was directly sent to the desk of the young king's study. The first deputy commander of the Right Cavalry used a heavy brush, the ink seeping through the back of the paper. Li Yanchao did not write any trivial words. He only wrote two simple sentences: Lu Dun should not have died. No one in Beiliang can treat the death of the left cavalry as the humiliation of the border army. In reality, Li Yanchao did not even need to write this letter. Su Fengnian was more familiar than Li Yanchao with how Lu Dayun used troops and how he was as a person. How could a general that Su Xiao would mention so many times in the meeting hall of Mount Qingliang be a normal person? Su Xiao had left Liaodong with 800 old soldiers, 40 years of military service, and in the end 300,000 Beiliang cavalry. There were many generals under his command. There were many who died on the battlefield, but there were also many who survived. Lu Diyuan was a full-fledged cavalry general. Almost everyone in the older generation of the Su family knew about him. From Yan Wenluan and Chen Yunchui to Zhou Kong and Yuan Nanting to Lu Jinu and Li Mofan, they all felt pity for Lu Dun, who suddenly left the Beiliang frontier army. That regret was not inferior to the departure of Wu Qi and Su Pu. Before Lu Dun left the manor for the battlefield, Lu Dun privately visited Su Fengnian in the study and had a heart-to-heart conversation. After all, Lu Dun was not as relaxed and casual as he appeared to be when he assumed the role of commander-in-chief. On the contrary, Lu Dun, who had grown up with the Su clan's cavalry, was more familiar with tough battles than Li Yanchao and Ning Amei, who had risen to prominence outside the Liangzhou Pass, and was used to the saying the Northern Liang cavalry is the best in the world. It could even be said that the pain and suffering of those years had been carved into his bones. Therefore, Lu Dian had to make everything clear in front of the young lord. Lu Dian wanted to make Su Fengnian feel at ease and also make himself feel at ease. In that face-to-face conversation, Lu Dian believed that the two cavalry forces of 60,000 would definitely not be able to safely roam in the increasingly narrow crevice outside the pass. Unless the left cavalry retreated to the north of Qingyuan Army Town, and the right cavalry went straight to the east of Grave Tomb Army Town, stretching out the battle line in the northeast and southwest, only then would they have room to breathe. But in this way, although the 60,000 cavalry would drag out an ignoble existence, what would happen to the north? Although the left and right cavalry would still be able to pin down a certain number of Beimang cavalry, but to put it bluntly, the Beimang barbarians didn't even need to send out their main force. They just needed to casually throw two low-level cavalry forces to us, and when the time comes, we would have to lie on the back of our horses and watch the show. I Lu Dian am a big uncouth man. How to lead an army into battle I learned bit by bit from the great general. I also consulted people like Su Pu Wuqi and Yuan Zuozong Qin Jibao. But I always felt that in the end, it was neither like a donkey nor like a horse, and it was not as convenient as my original method. In the end, I only believed in one principle. Once the cavalry entered the battlefield, they had to defeat the enemy's most elite field forces in one go. They absolutely could not lose the big picture for the sake of small gains and preserve their strength for the sake of the so-called overall situation. Otherwise, in a difficult battle with a great disparity in strength, the longer the battle dragged on, the more difficult it would be to fight. If it was a difficult battle, someone had to fight it. Otherwise, if everyone retreated again and again, all they could do was wait for death. How different would that be from that nest of old foxes and wolf cubs in the Bureau of Military Personnel of Liyang? Su Fengnian stood by the window. The autumn air filled the room and the lone lantern was cold. After opening the window, the chill was even heavier. Su Fengnian turned around. Back then, that man had been sitting on the chair in front of the desk. His appearance was ordinary. If he had not appeared in this study and instead stood on the fields within the pass, he would probably have been mistaken for a farmer with his face to the earth and his back to the sky. Your Highness, when I and the right cavalry set out at the same time, I will take the lead in breaking through to the north one day after the two armies have staggered, luring Murong Baoding's troops to gather their main forces. If nothing unexpected happens, Murong Baoding will definitely hear the news and request reinforcements from Wang Yong, the prefect of Aquarius Province. It's even very likely that he will temporarily transfer the Ruran cavalry to support Dong Lei's private cavalry. Your Highness, please be at ease. Even if my left cavalry is heavily surrounded, we will still kill at least 45,000 of the enemy's elite cavalry. Your Highness, I'll have to trouble you with one thing. When you go back, help me apologize to old Marshal He. Tens of thousands of border soldiers have been entrusted to me, but I can only take them to their deaths. My conscience can't be at ease, but I have no choice but to do this. Lu Diyuan is waiting for old Marshal He underground. However, it's best if I wait another 8 or 10 years. By then old Marshal He probably won't have the strength to beat people up. With just a little bit of mercy I'll be able to reincarnate. After this man stood up, he looked at the young vassal king who had also stood up and said in a low voice, if in the future it is proven that I, Lu Dian, was wrong, then no one needs to bring wine to my grave. Presumably, I won't be able to drink that wine with a guilty conscience. Of course, that is if I still have a grave. The two of them walked to the door of the study together. Lu Dian suddenly asked, Your Highness, do you think that in a few decades, there will still be people who remember us? Remember the battle that happened here? Su Fengnian had shook his head and said, Not necessarily. Damn it. Your Highness, please forgive me. I'm just a crude person. Nothing good comes out of a dog's mouth. It's fine. Tu Xiao is the same. I've long gotten used to it. Everything was still vivid in his mind. Those words were still echoing in his ears for a long time. Su Fengnian pressed his hands on the window and leaned forward. Lu Diyuan, who had rushed to the battlefield with the heart of death, didn't leave any last words. If there were any, it would be too familiar. His Royal Highness had often heard it when he was young. It was just that he had changed his name. Su Fengnian slowly turned his head and looked at the door of the study. The man named Lu Dun had finally clasped his fist and said, I am Lu Dun. the former cavalry general of Manjia Battalion, the current deputy commander of Left Cavalry. I request for a battle with you. Su Fengyan's lips moved slightly at that time. The two words were on the tip of his tongue, but in the end he couldn't say it. Allow a battle. Su Fengyan's hands suddenly pressed down heavily. Under his 10 fingers, the bricks on the windowsill shattered. Su Fengyan took a deep breath. He waved his hand at the darkness outside the window, indicating that the men of sacrifice of the Fu Shui room didn't need to pay any attention. He walked back to the desk and pulled out a piece of paper from a yellowed military book. The contents of the paper were the words of a man who had participated in the construction of North Resisting City. He said to his wife and children who had already left Lingzhou. The letter said that after autumn the weather wasn't too cold. The 1,000-layer cloth shoes sewn together were enough and didn't wear out too much. The clothes he brought to North Resisting City were also enough to keep him warm. He also met 2 fellow villagers from Lingzhou's Longqing County. When he was free he would go to a small town outside the city to drink a few mouthfuls of wine. The price was cheaper than inside the pass. He heard that they had won the battle in Liuzhou. The walls of North Resisting City were very high. The Beimang barbarians definitely wouldn't be able to break through in a year and a half. He told her and her 2 sons to relax. In the future, as long as they still received the wages sent every month, it meant that the area outside the pass was very peaceful and that there was no war. In the end, the man told his wife not to worry about money and not to worry about it. The children's studies were the most important. The letter was sent to a certain place in the Central Plains, the man's ancestral home. This piece of paper was just a copy. The real letter had naturally been sent out a long time ago. After the man arrived outside the pass, he didn't know how to read, so he couldn't write a letter. He had to find a nameless and poor scholar in the marketplace to help him write it. Under the dim yellow light, Su Fengyan lowered his head to look at the thin piece of paper spread out on the desk. When the last letter was sent out, it happened to be right after Lu Diyuan left North Resisting City. The first day Lu Diyuan re-entered the border army, Beiliang's Fu Shui bureau had already investigated this man's situation in Lingzhou's Longqing County town for more than 10 years. They sent the information one after another to the North Resisting City governor's residence, and then compiled it and placed it on the desk in this study room. Later on, Lu Diyuan's every move in North Resisting City or the Left Cavalry was recorded by the Fu Shui bureau's spies without any detail. Su Fengyan did not stop them. It was precisely by relying on these seemingly unreasonable and dark rules that Beiliang had reduced the number of casualties on the battlefield by a lot. However, on the matter of Lu Diyuan hiring someone to write a letter for him, Su Fengyan made a special trip to the torture chamber, and had the Fu Shui bureau's chief in charge of related matters not to interfere. It was only on this letter that Su Fengyan went back on his word. He had the Fu Shui bureau's spies intercept the letter. Unfortunately, the old scholar who did the letter-writing business had already followed the troops and left the border. If they really wanted to find him with the influence of the Fu Shui bureau outside the pass, they would be able to find him. However, Su Fengyan thought about it and decided to drop the idea. He felt that since he had the letter in his hands with his calligraphy skills and skill, it wouldn't be difficult to forge a letter every month. However, at this moment Su Fengyan regretted it again. Because he discovered that it was as if he couldn't pick up the brush at all. Even if he picked up the brush again and again, he didn't know how to write the contents of the letter a month later. Su Fengyan stood up, walked out of the study room and came to the courtyard. Chapter 1974. Still unable to calm down completely, Su Fengyan rose from the ground and swept to the horse path on the southern wall of Jiebei City. He jumped lightly and sat cross-legged on the top of the wall. Soon, the sound of armor vibrating could be heard from far away on the horse path. When the armored soldiers realized that it was the young lord who had come to the top of the wall, they quickly retreated silently. Although they did not whisper to each other, they could see the passion in each other's eyes. Su Fengyan clenched his fists and propped them up on his legs. He sat in the north and faced the south, looking at the distant night sky. He sat there for a night. Before dawn, he quietly returned to the manor. Not long after he sat down in the study, a spy from the torture chamber came to report that Mao Shulang, Qing Baishuang and Ji Lu-un, the 3 southern martial art masters, were about to arrive at the small town market in the south of the city that had suddenly become sparsely populated. Su Fengyan asked him to prepare a horse. After spending more than an hour dealing with the military and political affairs that had gradually piled up on his desk last night, he left the city alone. Su Fengnian did not specially come to welcome the three grandmasters of the Central Plains. He mainly wanted to take a look at the market and did not have too many reasons. Su Fengnian rode the horse to the small town. He dismounted and led the horse forward slowly. There were wine shops, tea houses, inns, and all kinds of scattered shops. Of course, one could not leave without legs. However, business was extremely poor. Some shops had simply closed down. This was reasonable. In just half a day, 3,000 to 4,000 people had left. Moreover, a large number of people who participated in the construction of the city had begun to return to their hometowns in batches under the escort of the local garrison. As Su Fengnian walked, there were shop assistants squatting under the eaves with sleepy eyes and yawning. The sudden drop in business made them happy to take a break from work. There were merchants who shouted loudly for their servants to move their goods to the south. They looked worried. There were brothel girls who leaned on the railings and looked up at the big red lanterns when they had nothing to do. It was rare for them to wake up so early. There were strong escorts who were escorting rare items from Lingzhou. They only cared about the safety of the goods and did not care about the shopkeeper's frown. At the end of the street, Su Fengnian suddenly saw an old Daoist priest pushing a cart towards the south. He was as thin as a match and his arm strength was weak. There was a linen poster on his cart that was used to solicit business. From top to bottom, there were 2 lines of regular script. Ziwei Do Shu 8 trigram 6 lines not bad, and face and palm reading Qimen Duanjiao not bad. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. This fortune teller was really honest. He led the horse forward quickly and bent down to help push the cart. The old man's Taoist robe that had been washed until it was white was out of place. In any case, Su Fengnian had never seen it before during his travels to Liang and Beimang. This was not strange. Taoist temples that could obtain credentials from the government all had very particular designs for their Taoist robes. If they were to forge and sell them without permission, once the county government found out, the crime would not be small. Back then, Su Fengnian had rented a Taoist robe when he first traveled the Jianghu. It was also a robe of questionable origin that could not be found. Even if the government had their eyes on it and wanted to get to the bottom of it, it would be difficult for them to convict him. The person in front of him was clearly someone similar to His Royal Highness, who was in dire straits back then. The fortune teller, who could barely be called a Taoist priest, narrowed his eyes and said, "Young master, you must be from a wealthy family. If I'm not wrong, your father's generation outside the Great Wall is very powerful." Su Fengnian's words hit the nail on the head. He smiled and said, "You saw that my horse was able to follow its master by itself after the reins were loosened. There's no doubt that it's a Bailiang war horse. In addition, the war is imminent and I dare to take a horse for a stroll here, so you deduce that I'm a descendant of a general, right?" The fortune teller's smile was forced. The immortal demeanor that he had painstakingly squeezed out disappeared and he was beaten back to his original state. Su Fengnian sighed and said, "To be honest, in my early years I was similar to you. In order to make a living, I pretended to be a god and became a fortune teller. You're a little better than me at that time. In any case, you have a tricycle." Su Fengnian joked, "But to be honest, you're really like a crane in a flock of chickens with your banner. How can you have any business?" The old man laughed and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter. Earning money here mainly depends on writing letters for people or peddling small safety talismans folded from yellow paper. 3 copper coins for one, so my business is passable. Before those Bailiang foreigners left, it was enough for me to eat meat and drink wine twice a day. Commoners like me are just ordinary people. When we pray to Buddha, God, and Bodhisattva, we must first ask for peace and stability. Then we ask for marriage in the right time. Finally, we ask for scholarly achievements and riches. Young master, don't you think so?" Su Fengnian nodded and said softly, "The commoners are actually using 3 copper coins to get peace of mind. You're doing a good thing." As if recalling those happy times of drinking wine and eating meat, the elder's face beamed with joy. However, soon after, he couldn't help but angrily say, "If our prince was a bit more formidable, this little old man's business would still be good for a month or so. Who would have thought that the northern Mang barbarians would attack North Rejecting City so early? What a waste of my life to obtain this trade. I've suffered a great loss. Now that I've returned to the pass, the days will be hard to bear." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "That vassal king really deserves to be scolded. What great grandmaster of Wushu commentary? It's useless. Perhaps he realized that the young master beside him was a son of a general and was closely related to the rise and fall of the Bailiang-Su family. In Jianghu it was reasonable to say too much and it was taboo to talk too much. Therefore the old man quickly changed his tone and mediated, "You can't say that. It's not easy for our prince to support such a large family property. His luck is not good either. Soon the Baimang barbarians will invade and they won't even give us a chance to fart. It's still not easy for our prince and the border army." The old man seemed to be unable to make up any more lies. He became more embarrassed and seemed to be restrained. His strength to push the cart became weaker. Chapter 1975. Su Fengnian increased the force of his hand and smiled. "Sir, you're lying. Don't worry, even though I'm a general of Bailiang, I can still listen to the words of others. I don't care if they're good or bad. Of course, I'll be happier if I hear good things." The old man and Su Fengnian pushed the cart south and were about to cross the river. The old man looked back at the towering city walls and suddenly stomped his feet. "There are some things that I can't hold back. Even if you bring me to Bailiang City to condemn me, I'll still spit it out." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. "All right, I'm sure it won't be anything good. Sir, please speak. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything." The old man laughed and straightened his back. He turned north and pointed at Bailiang City. "Sir, I've heard a lot of rumors recently. They're all saying that our prince is too daring. He didn't use so many old generals but chose to use those kids who haven't even grown hair yet. How can we fight this battle? Who won the first battle of Liangmang? Wasn't it General Lu Jinu of Liangzhou's Hutu City? Wasn't it General Wang Lingbao of Liuzhou's Longxiang army? Wasn't it because of Yozhou's crouching bow and crane Wanglo? Wasn't it because of the dead officers of the three cities? Wasn't it because of our Bailiang's most outstanding Great Snow Dragon cavalry and the two heavy cavalry armies that we've trained for many years? How many young foreigners are there? Only Melancholy Blade can barely be considered one. In my opinion, don't look at how Liuzhou has won a few battles. When it comes to critical moments, young people can't be relied on." The old man turned to look at the side of the young man's face and asked, "Sir, what do you think?" Su Fengnian looked into the distance. "Sir's words make some sense. However, the world is strange. Some things that make sense aren't necessarily true." The old man's eyes widened. "Sir, are you a scholar or a general's son? Why can't I understand what you're saying?" Su Fengnian sighed. "I don't deserve to be called a scholar. It shouldn't be wrong to say that I'm a general's son. I grew up drinking sand, smelling horse dung and listening to drums." After boldly expressing his thoughts, the old man's mood relaxed. He rarely joked. "Sir, other than being unreasonable, you're quite easy to talk to." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Old mister, is this a compliment or an insult?" The old man laughed and said, "Young master, you just have to listen to nice things. You'll never go wrong." Su Fengnian's mood also lightened up, and the haze between his brows gradually faded away. He smiled knowingly and said, "I've learned something." The old man didn't ask Su Fengnian to help push the carriage across the bridge. He pushed the carriage south alone. He lowered his voice and muttered to himself, "If only the great general was still alive. How would the Baimang barbarians dare come to our side? Bailiang doesn't even know how to fight. So what if we've won the battle? So many people will still die. I heard that there are 300,000 stone tablets behind Mount Qingliang. They're all empty toys. Being able to live is at least better than leaving behind a name after death, right?" Su Fengnian stood still and didn't say anything. The old man certainly couldn't guess the young man's identity. He didn't think that a martial arts master would help him push the carriage, so he continued to complain. "In my opinion, since the Central Plains Imperial Court is not a good thing, it's better to directly open the gate and let the Baimang barbarians enter the Bailiang Pass instead of letting our Bailiang frontier army soldiers die outside the pass. As long as both sides don't bump into each other inside and outside the Bailiang Pass, everything will be fine. Let those ungrateful people in the Central Plains suffer. Our people in Bailiang can live a peaceful life. I don't want to see the young king, or I'll definitely persuade him not to be impulsive and listen to the old man's advice. Don't blindly try to be a hero." Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and raised his head. The autumn wind messed up the young man's hair. Maybe it was because he was miserable, or maybe it was because he felt guilty, or maybe it was both, so the young king didn't speak from beginning to end. On the south side of the bridge, The back of the old man pushing the carriage was getting farther and farther away. Su Fengnian seemed to remember something and shouted, "Old man, don't be in a hurry to go south. And don't forget that within 20 days, the people can use the 3 post-house roads from Beijing City to Liangzhou Pass. There's no need to take a long detour." The old fortune teller seemed to have heard the shout. He paused for a moment, indicating to the young man that he understood, and then continued to go south. After the mansion was built, the study room received confidential intelligence reports from inside and outside the pass every day. There were reports from the Fushui room and the Ying room. Bailiang's intelligence reports were always divided into 3 levels according to priority. Originally, the intelligence reports that were qualified to be sent to the study room were only the A-level intelligence reports. But the young king asked for an extra level of intelligence reports. In fact, it was not important for military affairs, but the new king used it to ease the tension. Although the 2 branches must have done a certain degree of screening, and it was impossible to really send all the intelligence reports to the study room, the number was still relatively large, and most of them were related to the situation of the academy or the scholars' opinions. The content was varied and there was no lack of some extreme comments from young scholars. The young king always just browsed and didn't comment. There was a comment that the young king personally wrote down and used it as a daily self-reflection. Little virtue but high status, little wisdom but great schemes, little strength but heavy responsibilities. With such a muddle-headed king in charge of the border, the Bailiang frontier army will undoubtedly be defeated. The army's pressure, the father's last wish, the bitter cold hometown, the imperial court's constraint, the beautiful central plains, innocent people and the heavenly law's pressure. They were all heavy responsibilities, layered on top of each other. On the north side of the bridge, the young man who was less than 4 years old, slowly squatted down by the river. After dusting a licorice, he put it in his mouth and gently chewed. His mouth was full of sweetness. Chapter 1976. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up and whistled softly. The warhorse drinking water by the riverside galloped over. After mounting the horse, Su Fengnian grabbed the reins with one hand and clenched his other hand into a fist. He knocked heavily on his shoulder and grinned. Far away in the south, the old man did not stop walking. Tears flowed down his face as he muttered softly. "How do you feel now?" The old man finally stopped and looked around. All he could see was the yellow sand of the desert. Tide listening pavilion's strategist Li Yishan did not have a burial place after his death. His ashes were scattered outside the pass. The old man smiled and said, "Yishan, in life and in death I was not as good as you." At the southern gate of Beijing City, Su Fengnian suddenly stopped his horse and turned his head. The slight abnormality that he sensed with his celestial being body was fleeting. In an instant, calmness was restored and no trace could be found. Like an autumn leaf falling into a pond, there were few ripples. It was quiet and serene. Previously, in that unknown corridor in Liuzhou, the Liuzhou infantry faced off against the 50,000 southern cavalry of Beimang. Liangzhou's General Shifu was indeed as stated in the military document he submitted to the king of Fengbei City. He did not lead the 6,000 Qinyuan army elite cavalry to rush to the aid of the corridor battlefield. Instead, he stood firm on the plains south of the corridor, patiently waiting for Huang Songpu's main force to withdraw to the north. At the same time, he needed to prevent the southern dynasty's border cavalry reinforcements from going south to join up with Huang Songpu's remaining troops. This Liangzhou general only symbolically sent a scout to the corridor to investigate the military situation. Shifu stopped his horse and looked south. His back was always to the bloody battlefield that was destined to be filled with corpses. His face was calm and his heart was stone. On the southernmost Old Woman Mountain main battlefield, Liang Mang's side suffered the heaviest casualties in the third charge. Ko Jianghuai threw in the cavalry that belonged to the Liuzhou provincial governor manor. Huang Songpu also used 600 true heavy cavalry. The men and horses were all equipped with armor. Every particularly tall and strong Beimang warhorse was equipped with face, neck, chest, body armor and parasitic armor. They were collectively known as iron cavalry armor that spears and arrows could not penetrate. Chifu Longguan, the young general who temporarily took control of the Lu province cavalry from Ko Jianghuai, once again led the remaining direct collision camp cavalry to charge at the 600 heavy cavalry. Only while Chifu Longguan led the charge, Zhou Xian personally led the 300 Dragon Elephant Elite Cavalry, gradually catching up to the direct collision camp on the battlefield. In the end, they were neck to neck with the direct collision camp, opening up the formation together. After the 3 charges, the Liuzhou cavalry was almost completely wiped out. The Longxiang army also suffered great losses. On the other hand, even though Huang Songpu's elite cavalry suffered great losses, the most numerous E-type cavalry still miraculously maintained a high level of integrity. There were 30,000 cavalry. According to the situation of the Old Woman Mountain battlefield, even without the 50,000 reinforcements, Commander Huang Songpu had full confidence in wiping out the Liuzhou main force. However, right at this time, a majestic cavalry army entered their field of vision from the plains east of Old Woman Mountain. That scene was like the sun rising over the eastern sea. This elite cavalry army that came to reinforce Old Woman Mountain without any warning spread out in a line. Like a wave of Guangling River, they rapidly advanced from east to west. This cavalry army that appeared out of nowhere was definitely the easiest to recognize apart from the Great Snow Dragon cavalry in the Beiliang Frontier Army. This was because each of their helmets had a snow-white eagle feather that fluttered in the wind. On the sides of each horse's saddle, there were arrows that shot out like 2 lumps of reed flowers. The cavalry's advance was like a great snowstorm surging between heaven and earth. Not only was the armor dyed in blood, the 2 spears that had already been replaced, the Beimang commander Huang Songpu's face was covered in blood. He turned his head to the east, his eye sockets about to split apart. On the Old Woman Mountain battlefield, after both sides spared no effort in the 3 vicious attacks, their Beimang cavalry army just happened to be at the original Liuzhou cavalry position. This was originally the plan of this Beimang Southern Dynasty's #1 person. He wanted to wait until Liuzhou's main force suffered great losses, their energy falling to rock bottom. As long as the Beimang cavalry army was in the southern battlefield, they would be able to form a natural line of defense that could prevent the Liuzhou cavalry from turning back to the south. However, reality proved that the old commander's plan succeeded. However, Ko Jianghuai's plan also succeeded. That young Liuzhou main general didn't plan on withdrawing from Old Woman Mountain at all. He clearly wanted to turn around and surround the Beimang army. Huang Songpu didn't hesitate in the slightest. He ordered the entire army to do their best to break through the encirclement. Even if they were ambushed along the way, they were not to be entangled in battle. They just had to head north and meet up with the reinforcements that were about to arrive at the northern battlefield of Old Woman Mountain. Victory would still be on the side of Beimang. Chifu Longguan, Zhou Xian and Liemo Fan, these 3 generals who had fought side by side at Old Woman Mountain, didn't even need to greet each other before they quickly changed their formation. From the left, middle and right armies Yanxi formation to a horizontal snake formation, stretching out as far as possible to form a long front line. Every dog has its day. It was now the turn of the Liuzhou border armies front, middle and back to charge. Li Mo Fan's Dragon Elephant Cavalry was in the front 2 rows, Zhou Xiang's army was in the middle, and Chifu Longguan's remaining Liuzhou cavalry was at the back. What they needed to do was no longer to kill the enemy. They only needed to try their best to stop the horse hooves of Huang Songpu's main force from breaking through the encirclement. After Yuan Nanting's White Feather Light Cavalry unleashed 3 waves of arrows from the flanks of Northern Mang's main army, another 6,000 cavalry with an imposing aura found an opportunity to draw their blades in an orderly fashion and charge into the enemy formation. It was as if they had sliced through the waist of Beimang's cavalry formation. Huang Songpu's direct cavalry, Wanyan's private cavalry, and the 30,000 second cavalry were all sliced in half. The rest of the main force, the White Feather Light Cavalry, began to circle northward, not engaging in a chaotic battle with the Northern Mang army. Instead, they relied on the advantage of light cavalry, which was originally charging from east to west, to quickly circle northward. If someone had just climbed to the top of Old Woman Mountain and looked down at the battlefield, they would probably think that this light cavalry was an ally of the Grassland Cavalry, and that they were heading north together from the left and right. Beimang's Kiliarchs and Centurions led their remaining forces to charge fearlessly at the right flank of the White Feather Light Cavalry in despair. Unfortunately, that heroic scene ended up like a stone hitting a river. It couldn't disrupt the pace of the White Feather Light Cavalry at all. The White Feather Light Cavalry, after suffering from the Northern Mang Cavalry's diagonal charge, easily moved slightly closer to the right. The leftmost formation that was originally more or less straightforward now had depressions everywhere, as if there were pockets that the northern Mang deathsworn soldiers smashed into. What awaited these grassland barbarians was definitely not the northern cold blade that engaged in close combat, but rather the extremely skilled cavalry archery. The 200 to 300 southern court cavalry were shot down like rice paddies, without the slightest bit of bitterness from the collisions, not dying miserably on horseback. When faced with the white feather light cavalry's arrows, the northern Mang cavalry who were able to continue charging a dozen or so steps forward before falling off their horses, they only felt a type of remaining grievance and helplessness. When faced with the white feather light cavalry's arrows, the northern Mang cavalry who were able to continue charging more than 10 steps forward before falling off their horses, only felt a type of remaining grievance and helplessness. In the northernmost part of the Crone Mountain battlefield, only dust could be vaguely seen. It was the 4,000 iron stupas under Ning Amei's command that were inserted between the two battlefields. At the peak of the Crone Mountain, Ko Jianghuai said calmly, "The situation is set. Huang Songpu is finished." Qin Shiliang also saw the situation on the battlefield. A smile appeared on his pale face. He turned his head and said with a hoarse voice, "General Ko is worthy of the title, God of War." Ko Jianghuai looked to the east. "I'm afraid of losing the big picture for the small." Qin Shiliang asked doubtfully, "After the battle at the Crone Mountain, what's wrong with sending troops east to reinforce North Resisting City?" Ko Jianghuai shook his head. "Who said we're going to North Resisting City?" Qin Shiliang was dumbfounded. At the foot of the Crone Mountain, Li Hanlin gathered the crossbowmen and prepared to enter the battlefield again. The secret retainer that was sent by the young king to protect the White Horse Commandant, Lu Huang of the Martial Emperor City, was about to get on his horse and follow them. Li Hanlin said with a firm expression, "Lu Huang, you go directly to North Resisting City. A dignified martial Dao great grandmaster eating sand behind my butt. So boring." Lu Huang didn't seem to be surprised at all. He sat on the horse and looked at the mostly young faces. Finally he smiled and nodded at Li Hanlin. He joked, "Boy, don't be greedy and die. Otherwise your king of Bailiang won't forgive me." Li Hanlin grinned. "Help me tell Brother Nian that we made a promise when we were young to pee in the temple of West Baimang. His share, I'll take care of it." Lu Huang rolled his eyes and reminded, "Then remember to drink more water before doing it." Li Hanlin laughed. "I'll even drink horse pee." Lu Huang gave a thumbs up before he rode away. "I'm convinced." In the Battle of the Corridor, 6 battles and 6 defeats, the 50,000 people of Baimang's southern border town cavalry were completely driven into madness. After 6 charges there were only 20,000 people left. Even if they knew that they were unable to help the Old Woman Mountain battlefield, even if they were destined to be severely punished by the Emperor, these red-eyed grassland cavalry still launched the 7th attack without hesitation. As long as Chao Wei led his 9,000 elite cavalrymen into the battlefield from the north entrance of the corridor, even if it was only 30 minutes later, the monk soldiers of Mount Lantuo and the 3,000 soldiers of Liuzhou would be completely wiped out. When Chao Wei personally led 800 men of sacrifice to break through Baimang's formation and killed all the way to the circular formation formed by only 200 people, there were only corpses. Along the way they saw shattered iron shields, broken lances, broken Modeo swords, and destroyed bows and crossbows scattered all over the place. The so-called simple circular formation was just the monk soldiers of Lantuo Mountain and the young men of Liuzhou who were all heavily injured. They were just waiting for death. The one who really blocked the charge of Baimang's barbarian cavalry was a slender man in armor and covered in blood. He was the eldest disciple of Wang Xianji of Martial Emperor City, the Grand Master of the Central Plains, Yu Groom. This person held a modeo that cut horses and a cold saber hung on his left and right waist. The number of Baimang cavalry that died under his saber was no less than 900. Yu Groom had personally promised the young king that he would ensure that Xia Shibian didn't die. Chapter 1977. It was not that he could not forcefully take Xia Shibian out of the corridor and out of this blood-soaked battlefield. But when Xia Shibian personally fought a bloody battle and defeated the Baimang cavalry for the 5th time, he firmly shook his head at Yu Groom. Yu Groom laughed it off and did not force him. Instead he picked up a long spear and a mo sword from the battlefield. The two fought side by side. This continued all the way until Western Xia suffered serious injuries. At that time, this Lu province deputy general who couldn't get up was grabbed by a middle-aged monk who was in charge of Western Xia's safety by the shoulder from under the hooves of a northern Mang cavalry, and then heavily flung backwards. The monk, who was already an arrow at the end of its flight, was instead swarmed by several dozen riders, dying on the spot. Qiao Wei's cavalry quickly slaughtered their way out from behind, becoming the final straw that broke the camel's back. After the northern Mang side cavalry barely managed to stop Qiao Wei's vanguard cavalry charge, they were quickly completely routed. These cavalry of the southern dynasty did not dare to fight or die. Otherwise they would not have charged to their deaths 7 times. But Qiao Wei's cavalry appeared out of the blue. It was too sudden and too fierce. Especially in the narrow corridor, 9,000 cavalry launched an endless charge. It was as if there was only the endless figures of the Beimang cavalry in their field of vision. The northern Mang cavalry suffered a crushing defeat. After a major commander led 700 riders under his command towards the bridegroom's ruined circular formation that was clearly already on the verge of collapse, but still wasn't willing to fall, all of the southern court's border cavalry made their way around that unfamiliar martial Dao Grand Master who could hold back 10,000 men by himself, quickly making their way around that circular formation, decisively fleeing south from both sides. Qiao Wei jumped off the back of his horse and almost fell. He stumbled into the round formation and finally saw the young general sitting cross-legged with a blade. His helmet was long gone and his armor was broken. Blood blurred his originally elegant face. A one-armed young man from Liuzhou had to use his elbow to lightly press against the back of this general. Qiao Wei knelt on one knee and reached out his trembling hand to gently wipe away the blood on the young general's face. In fact, the young general had already lost consciousness. He was just holding on to his last breath, unwilling to collapse. Yu Groom ruthlessly threw out his modeo, splitting a Beimang cavalry general's 2 people and their horses into 2 halves. He came to Qiao Wei and Xie Shibian's side, squatted down behind them and reached out to hold Xie Shibian's wrist. Let's not talk about the external injuries, but the internal organs have been injured. Only if you are lucky enough will you have a chance to survive. Without saying a word, Qiao Wei turned around and punched the bridegroom's chest. His eyes were red as he scolded angrily. Su Fengnian asked you to stay by Xie Shibian's side just for this bullshit, slim chance of survival? Bridegroom, you didn't say anything. He just continued to lower his head and inject a gentle aura into Xie Shibian. Xie Shibian was not willing to leave. Yu Groom, who had never been on the battlefield, did not know why, but he also felt that he should not leave. The 2 of them did not leave. Xie Shibian felt that he should die in battle here. Yu Groom felt that dying in the yellow sand outside Liuzhou Pass was not too bad. However, after saving the deputy general of Liuzhou many times, the latter angrily said, "Yu Groom, you. Every time you save me you kill 3 or 4 fewer people. Do you want me to teach you how to calculate this?" After punching Yu Groom, Qiao Wei did not immediately pull back his arm. Instead, he loosened his fist and heavily patted this Grand Master of the Central Plains on the shoulder. He choked out, "Thank you." Yu Groom still did not raise his head. He only asked, "After Xie Shibian's injuries have stabilized, can I entrust him to you and send him to Qingsong in Liuzhou? I want to go to North Rejecting City." Qiao Wei nodded and did not say anything. After a long time, Yu Groom loosened his fingers and slowly stood up. He pressed both hands on the cold sabers at his waist and asked again, "Temporarily lend me 2 sabers. Does this count as violating Baoyang's military law?" Qiao Wei took a deep breath and shook his head with a smile. "From now on Yu Groom, you are a cavalry commandant under Great General Chao's command. How about it? The battle in the corridor was won by you through your own merits. Not to mention 2 cold sabers, you can hang them all over your body." Yu Groom laughed it off. Joining the Baoyang frontier army and becoming a cavalry general under Qiao Wei was absolutely impossible for the first disciple of Wang Xianji who was focused on martial arts. However, Yu Groom could not refuse this kindness. He lowered his head and stared at Xie Shibian, who he had pulled back from the gates of hell. Then he walked a few steps away and tiptoed. His body instantly rose from the ground. He went straight to North Rejecting City. On the day when the young lord of North Rejecting City and the 3 martial grandmasters of Nanjiang entered the city one after another, the great victory at Old Woman Mountain in Liuzhou was quickly reported to North Rejecting City. The city was bustling with noise. However, almost 2 hours later, Another urgent spy report came to the mansion. The 400,000 cavalrymen of Beimang would arrive at North Rejecting City in 3 days at the latest. After Mao Shulang entered the North Rejection City, he requested to climb up the city wall. After getting permission from the mansion, the burly old man began to walk alone along the horse path. He walked and stopped, not saying a word. The old scholar in green, Qing Baishuang, quickly broke through the realm on small lotus peak of Wudong Mountain and directly entered the great celestial state. After accompanying his good friend Ji Lu and into the mansion, he stayed in the ceremonial room and learned from the famous literary guru Chancellor Wang. Only Ji Lu, the chief guest of the Dragon Palace of Nanjiang, came to the study of the second hall to visit the famous young lord of the Central Plains. Su Fengyan did not deliberately go down the stairs to greet him. He just stood at the door of the study with a smile on his face. After leading Ji Lu into the study, he personally handed him a cup of Beiliang Frontier Army's tribute tea. Ji Lu took the tea and sat down. He went straight to the point and said, "Your Highness, if I am willing to go out of the city to fight, is there a place for me?" Su Fengyan also asked directly, "Is it just a formality to fish for fame in the Central Plains? Or do you really want to go all out and fight to the end?" Ji Lu gently twisted the tea lid and rubbed the edge of the cup. He raised his head and asked, "What's the difference?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "If it's the former, it's simple. You don't even need to enter the battlefield. I will let Fu Shui and Yang Ying branch release the news to encourage you." Ji Luan smiled. "What if I choose the latter?" Su Fengyan said indifferently, "Then I'm afraid Mr. Ji will have to say his last words to the 2 old friends of Nanjiang first. Because Beimang's 400,000 troops will come to North Rejecting City in 3 days, you won't have the chance to follow Beiliang's cavalry to fight outside the pass. You will only have an extremely difficult battle to fight. To tell you the truth, even I don't have the confidence to say that I can defend North Resisting City." Ji Lu-un, who was sitting on the chair opposite the desk, was silent. He hadn't even taken a sip of the tea in his hand. Ji Lu-un finished the tea in his cup in one gulp and gently placed it on the desk. He then placed his sword on his knees and smiled calmly. "If I didn't come to Beiliang with Qing Baishuang, I wouldn't care about the outcome of Liangmang's war. But since I'm here, I might as well take this opportunity to vent my anger." Su Fengyan said softly, "Decades of hard work in martial arts. It's not easy to have the cultivation of a grandmaster." Ji Lu-un suddenly laughed angrily. "Speaking of martial arts, Your Highness, are you saying that I, Ji Lu-un, have spent decades of my life as a dog?" Su Fengyan was stunned for a moment. He quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, "Mr. Ji, don't say it out loud." Ji Lu-un glared at him. At this moment Ji Lu-un quickly turned his head and was shocked to see a young girl hanging upside down outside the window. She pointed to Su Fengyan's direction. Su Fengyan said softly, "I know, don't worry." Not long after, the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, who had 2 swords hanging from his waist, slowly walked into the study. Ji Lu-un stood up and nodded to Dong Tai to greet him. There had always been many talented swordsmen in the world of swordsmen. But after the death of the previous generation's sword god, Li Chungang, there was only one person in front of him who was worthy of being called the most talented swordsman. Since Ji Lu-un was a swordsman, no matter if he was conceited or arrogant, no matter how high his status was in Jianghu, he should respect this ordinary-looking middle-aged swordsman. After Dong Tai calmly returned the greeting, he directly turned his head to look at the young king and asked, "I won't drink the tea. Just tell me, when will the war with Beimang start? Where do you need me to be?" Su Fengyan said, "I may need to trouble you to fight twice. The first time will be quick, in a few days. The second time it may only be the 2 of us and the battlefield will be further away." Dong Tai said calmly, "The 2 swords I brought are enough." After saying this, Dong Tai turned and left. Ji Lu-un also said goodbye to Su Fengyan and followed the peach blossom sword god's footsteps to ask him some questions about swordplay. There were different levels of knowledge and specialization in different fields. Dong Tai could be said to be the top swordsman in the world, whether it was swordplay or swordsmanship. Most importantly, although Ji Lu-un was only at the mysterious finger realm, he had never shown his trump card, the 3 swords. He believed that his power could kill a celestial state master. Dong Tai had always been recognized as the world's #1 mysterious finger realm master. He was even better than Catman Han Xianxian. How could Ji Lu-un and not be tempted to ask for some advice. On the same day, the Snow House Spear Saint Li Hongho and many other top Jianghu bosses entered North Reject City. Su Fengnian did not show up, even the polite greetings were skipped. It was only when a blind female Guqin player entered the city that Su Fengnian personally went to the gate of the mansion. The two who had faced each other in life and death in the past walked together to the meeting hall. Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Miss Shui, do you have a message for Su Su or this old man Lu?" The blind lady with the Guqin bag shook her head and said, "Su Su's guilt towards Bailiang, I will repay it." Su Fengnian stopped in his tracks. "Have you ever thought that if you die outside Liangzhou Pass, who will repay Su Su's regret for the rest of her life?" Shui Songguan's tone was as cold as usual. "I only know that Su Su is not happy. I did not do what I could, I will not be happy in this life." Su Fengnian shook his head and said in a low voice, "Shui Songguan, I advise you to return to Western Shu and return to Su Su's side." Chapter 1978. Shui Songguan also shook her head. "I can't let him continue to think that Su Su is useless." Su Fengnian blurted out, "Have you ever thought about what Su Su wants and what she wants the most?" Shui Songguan turned her head. She who was blind gently looked at the young king. Su Fengnian was suddenly speechless. What was the difference between the things he had done and this seemingly unreasonable and stubborn woman? Su Fengnian let out a heavy breath and bitterly smiled. "Then stay." Shui Songguan nodded. The two continued to move forward. Su Fengnian suddenly said, "At this moment Shortcake must be jealous." Shui Songguan smiled knowingly. Her face was full of gentleness. Su Fengnian snorted, "Miss Shui, you actually fell for a guy like Shortcake, really?" The young king did not continue. Shui Songguan smiled. "Your Highness wants to say that you are blind, but I am a blind person." Su Fengnian was a bit embarrassed. Su Fengnian stopped as if he was struck by lightning. His body stiffened. Shui Songguan frowned. She did not turn around, but she already felt three powerful auras behind her. One of them was so majestic that it was suffocating. A young man and a young woman. Both of them had shocking bloodstains on their bodies. A middle-aged man holding an iron spear walked towards Su Fengnian and Shui Songguan. Su Fengnian slowly turned around and looked at the three people who were supposed to be at Huayang Pass. Su Yanbing, the current sword crown of the Wu family's sword tomb, Wu Luding and sword attendant Cui Hua. Su Yanbing smiled. "Don't worry, the outer city of Huayang Pass is still there." Su Fengnian was relieved, but his face was still dignified. Su Yanbing explained, "It was Chu Lushan who wanted the three of us to go back to North Resisting City. He said that 80 Wu swordsmen would be enough. The three of us can only stare at each other all day long. It's meaningless. It's better to go back to North Resisting City." Su Fengnian was about to speak, but Wu Luding already impatiently said, "You know what kind of character Fatty Chu is. If he is determined to drive us away, I'm afraid that we won't be able to eat in Huayang Pass." Actually, what Chu Lushan said is not wrong. 80 sword mounds cavalry should be enough to deliver intelligence at the moment. Su Yanbing glared at the young sword mound, who spoke without thinking, and the latter shut his mouth resentfully. Su Yanbing said in a low voice, "Chu Lushan said that Bailiang will definitely win at Crone Mountain. Next, the Liuzhou border army will go all the way north to Xijing. Beimang's army will have to speed up their attack on North Resisting City. It's a gamble to see who can break through their nest faster." Chu Lushan also said that as long as North Resisting City can hold on until the winter snow melts, his Huayang Pass will be able to hold on until next spring. Su Fengnian breathed a sigh of relief. Since he said so, then I don't have to worry about the rear. Su Fengnian had people lead Wu Luding, swordsman Cui Hua, and officer Shui to the side rooms of the three halls, while he and Su Yanbing went to the study. After Su Yanbing entered the study, he said in a low voice, "Chu Lushan said something at the end. He asked you to remember that if you still want our Bailiang border army to have the last laugh, then the Great Snow Dragon cavalry and the 2 heavy cavalry cannot be used in this battle." Su Fengnian was silent. In the end, Chu Lushan just didn't want the Bailiang cavalry to die on the way to Huayang Pass. Bai Yu personally saw Xianxia out of the city. Mr. White Lotus wasn't good at riding, so he sat in a carriage and Xianxia followed on horseback. The carriage stopped north of the river crossing bridge. Bai Yu got off the carriage and Xianxia led the horse forward. The two walked to the middle of the wooden bridge together. Xianxia couldn't help but ask, Why did you come to North Resisting City to be the provincial governor of Liangzhou? Why didn't you stay in Liangzhou? Bai Yu rested his elbows on the bridge railing and propped up his chin. Looking at the slowly flowing river, he said calmly, on the one hand, if we stay in the Liangzhou provincial governor's mansion, we have to depend on others' whims and whims. We're firmly suppressed by Song Dongming, the deputy administrator overseeing Mount Qingliang. Rather than fighting in close quarters on a chess game that we're bound to lose and making us look ugly, it's better to switch to a different chessboard. Of course, this reason is far-fetched and is only used to convince myself. Even a layman like you might not be willing to believe it. In fact, the reason why I chose to follow the new Liang prince to North Resisting City, other than hoping to become a more trusted official than Song Dongming, was also selfish. Xianxia frowned. Selfish? Bai Yu turned his head slightly and asked with a face full of smiles. Do you know what a scholar's ambition is? Xianxia, who was already in a bad mood, snorted and said unhappily, a boorish man like me doesn't understand the ambition of scholars like you. Bai Yu blinked. Do you really not understand, or are you pretending not to? Xianxia kept a straight face and didn't say anything. Bai Yu didn't want to get to the bottom of it and looked at the river again. However, he took a step back, shook his sleeves and straightened his clothes. In an era, in a country, someone has to stand out resolutely at a certain moment and stand in a certain position. Just stand there. Not one step back. As long as you stand there, you have an unshirkable responsibility. On the battlefield, Lu Jinu of Hutu City and Wei Jingtang of Hengshui City were like this. In the court, Zhang Jilu was even more so. Now it's the turn of the new prince of Liang, Su Fengnian. Bai Yu narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. I don't care what Su Fengnian's goal was or what his original intentions were, but in the end he chose to stand there. In any case, I, Bai Yu, only look at the results and don't ask for the reasons. Therefore I also chose to stand here. Whether it's merits or demerits, allow me to die and let your descendants judge. Bai Yu laughed and said, I don't like it when the later generations depict this soul-stirring war. I don't like it when the scholars of the later generations flip through that book and discover that in the end, not a single scholar died here. Xianxia sighed softly. Bai Yu suddenly said sadly, in the past I didn't feel much, but now I'm beginning to realize that in the conversations of the officials of the Central Plains, there's a lot of mockery towards Bailiang. Those condescending and pointing fingers are so detestable. Xianxia suddenly mounted his horse and said in a low voice, let's go. If I listen any longer, I'm afraid I won't be able to leave either. Bai Yu laughed loudly, go back to your Central Plains. As expected, Xianxia squeezed his horse's belly and urged it to leave. Bai Yu didn't continue to watch Xianxia leave. In any case, he couldn't see clearly, so he didn't want to waste his energy. Bai Yu suddenly slapped the railing of the bridge and sang loudly, the wind blows. My Bailiang is strong. Wang Linquan, who was jokingly called Bailiang's god of fortune, left Mount Qingliang Wutongan with a smile after seeing his daughter Wang Chudong. However, when there was no one around, Wang Linquan's smile faded. This old man, who was the wealthiest person in Qingzhou and the wealthiest person in Bailiang, was only left with a face full of exhaustion. Su Weisheng had privately told him something. As Wang Chudong's father, he couldn't refuse, but as an old soldier of the Su family, he couldn't rest easy. Chapter 1979. Zhao Yute, who used to be Princess Consort Wu Su's sword attendant, gently pushed the wheelchair and arrived at the shore of Tide Hark Lake with Su Weisheng. This armored woman wanted to say something but hesitated. Su Weisheng said softly, "And I won't go to North Resisting City. You shouldn't go either." Zhao Yute asked in a trembling voice, "Why?" Su Weisheng folded his hands on his knees and looked at the famous Tide Hark Lake. He said calmly, "We'll only distract him if we go. He'll have to arrange a retreat for us behind our backs and pretend to be happy in front of us every day. It's so tiring." Zhao Yute's hands trembled. Su Weisheng tilted his head and rested it on the back of Zhao Yute's hand. "And if that day really comes, help him take care of Wang Chudong and go to the Central Plains to find a paradise far away from the flames of war." Zhao Yute nodded with difficulty. In Wutong Courtyard, the young female literary master who had won first place with The First Snow was racking her brains because she had just promised to write a masterpiece for someone that would not lose to The First Snow. She would write about the smoke of the Northwest, about the war at the border, about those brave deaths, and about those magnificent scenes. She would clear his name and give voice to Bailiang so that their names would be immortalized for generations to come. She couldn't allow future historians to throw dirty water at her. The slightly thin and haggard Lu Qingyan sat beside her. She was taking a break from her work to help the famous master Wang grind ink. Wang Chudong suddenly looked up and said with a bitter face, "Sister Lu, I haven't written for so long that I don't know where to start." Lu Qingyan smiled gently. "Writing is a work of nature. Don't be anxious." Wang Chudong made an "oh" sound and continued to ponder over her work. Lu Qingyan slowly got up and rubbed Wang Chudong's head. "Take your time." Wang Chudong suddenly smiled and waved her fists. "Don't worry, I'll definitely come up with ideas. When the time comes, no one can stop me." Lu Qingyan smiled. "When the time comes, I'll be the first to read it." After Lu Qingyan walked out of the house, Wang Chudong, who had always given everyone the impression of innocence, suddenly burst into tears. A carriage passed by the battlefield of Crone Mountain, where the smell of blood still lingered. A young general with a pale face stood up with difficulty and lifted the curtain to look, unwilling to put it down for a long time. That female bodhisattva of Mount Lautoa was sitting in the carriage, in charge of preventing his injuries from worsening. She had to constantly impart a stream of peaceful qi to him. Xie Shibian looked at the abandoned Beimang corpses on the battlefield and said softly, 20,000 monk soldiers. Although most of them belong to the other powers of the Lantua Mountains, but your 3,000 direct disciples are also amongst them. More importantly, they are all your 6-jeweled heavenly jewel master. I'm sure you can guess why I want to go to that corridor, right? The female bodhisattva, whose hair almost reached her waist, nodded indifferently. Xie Shibian gave a bitter smile and said, "This is killing 3 birds with 1 stone, and I have no choice but to do it." Not only would they be able to intercept Northern Mang's reinforcements as much as possible, they would also be able to turn the originally useless monk soldiers into a surprise force in Flo province. In the end, they would naturally be able to whittle away at Western region's reserves. Regardless of whether Northern Liang won or lost, there would only be benefits. If they won, the severely wounded Lantua Mountain would most likely have no choice but to continue sending monk soldiers to Northern Liang for the sake of pursuing benefits. If Northern Liang's Su family lost, in the future, Northern Mang would lose at least 20,000 monk soldiers if they wanted to seize the opportunity to invade the Central Plains. In the end, it is Bailiang who has the upper hand, and your Lantua Mountains can only be led by the nose. She sneered and said, "You, the main culprit of Western Border's disaster, if you died in that corridor back then, if Lu Province's border army also suffered a great defeat, I would have removed your head without the slightest hesitation and brought it to Northern Mang to ask for rewards." Xie Shibian smiled and said, "I'm sorry to disappoint you." After saying this, Xie Shibian had no choice but to put down the curtain. He lay back down and quickly fell into a deep sleep. She continued to close her eyes and rest without sorrow or joy. She silently recited a passage of scripture to release the souls of the dead. Inside and outside Huayang Pass, Southern Chu and Northern Dong, 2 of the world's most famous fatties, were in a standoff. Dongzhuo rode his horse to the front lines and raised his head to look at the top of the walls outside Huayang Pass. More than 20,000 sinners who had lost their identities from the grasslands were besieging the city like ants. Dongzhuo, who had a personal army of 140,000 soldiers, did not have the extravagant hope that these 20,000 soldiers would be able to break through Huayang Pass. He did not even think about taking the outer walls. Dongzhuo was patiently waiting for winter to come, waiting for the arrival of a heavy snowfall. Before that, using 20,000 soldiers who had no choice but to throw away their lives to deplete the forces defending Huayang Pass was very cost-effective. These 20,000 soldiers were only obtained by Dongzhuo and that old woman without spending a single tael of silver. Once he used the wealth of his father-in-law's Yelu family, he could borrow another 20,000 strong men from the grassland's great picker. In addition, Dongzhuo had already sent a message to Hushi Prefecture's Jefeng Helian Wei. "If you can't take the towns of Fuling and Liuya before winter, I'll borrow soldiers to help you. Don't be polite. I, Dongzhuo, will be unprecedentedly generous." When the veteran General Helian Wei, who was famed for his ability in warfare, heard this, he did not even bother to reply. He launched a large-scale assault on the city day and night. His offensive was far more powerful than that of Huayang Pass. Dong Zhuo habitually tapped his teeth together like the world's softest drum. Chu Lushan stood on the walls of the inner city and similarly gazed at the assaulting army in the distance. Chu Lushan was clad in iron armor and exuded an awe-inspiring aura. The Bailiang Protector General crossed his fingers and tapped them together expressionlessly. Beimang's crown prince, Yelu Hongkai, did not ride a carriage. Instead, he wore golden armor and rode a horse in the middle of the army. Looking around, the grassland cavalry stretched out endlessly. It was said that in history the emperors of the Central Plains had to ride a giant chariot pulled by 8 horses. However, the grassland did not follow this custom. However, this crown prince felt that after he became the ruler of the Central Plains, he could change this custom. He did not think that the emperor, whom he feared from the bottom of his heart, would actually be willing to let him hold real power and not be a puppet. The Qieshui army around him that only listened to him was proof of this. Although the appearance of Yelu Dongchuang and Chun Zhemo and Tuobachin was a bit of an eyesore, it did not affect the overall situation. As long as he took every step carefully, those two would not be able to cause any trouble. One of them had a grandfather who was a senior official of 3 dynasties, while the other's father was the Beimang god of war. Their backing was indeed frightening, but could they compare to him? Out of the corner of his eye, he inadvertently saw the woman sitting high on the horse beside him. It was his wife, the crown princess in name. If it was said that he was quite respectful to her in the beginning and treated her honestly, and there were many times when she was his backbone, an existence that he needed to look up to. But after that person quietly appeared, the relationship between husband and wife became more and more distant, almost going from treating each other as a guest to treating each other as cold as ice. Thinking about the lover that was destined to never be revealed to the public, the Beimang crown prince felt a little regret and guilt. However, compared to the country and the Central Plains that had never had a ruler of the grassland, the choice was obvious. Who asked that Bailiang young man surnamed Su and his so-called 300,000 cavalry to be so useless and about to become his prisoners? The Beimang crown prince was filled with pride for the first time. He wanted to roar out loud. I have 400,000 cavalry under me. How can a lone north-denying city stop me? Chapter 1980. In the night, candles as thick as a baby's arm were lit in the meeting hall of the mansion, illuminating the spacious hall as bright as day. The generals and generals in the hall were gathered together, possessing a kind of invisible brilliance, which complemented the brilliance of the lanterns in the hall. The commander-in-chief of the Northern Liang Cavalry, Yuan Zuozong, and great ancestor Gu Qinyunchui, were the 2 deputy commander-in-chief of the infantry troops stationed in Liangzhou. There was also Yang Shenxing, a deputy military governor who had truly integrated into the Northern Liang border army. Lu Dian, who had previously been the deputy general of the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry as the deputy general of Yuzhou, was now in charge of a heavy cavalry. There were also Chao Xiaojiao Hong Xinjia and the others who specially came from Yuzhou, as well as a large number of generals and captains who were temporarily summoned to North Jebei City, such as Lingzhou's deputy commander Wang Ji and Huang Xiaokuai, the 2 Tongguan captains who guarded the east gate of Liangzhou, Lingzhou's Fengqiu captains Zhu Boyu, Beigua captains Ren Chunyun, and Jiao Wui who replaced Huang Xiaokuai as the Pearl captains. Many generals gathered together to discuss how to defend North Jebei City. Among them Hong Xinjia, who built the Gourd Wu Fort's beacon system single-handedly, actually did not have a high rank, but at this time, together with the young lord and the 2 deputy commanders of the border army, they were all listening attentively to the details of defending the city. A large number of green-robed counselors were present to listen. Madman Hong Xuan was undoubtedly the fastest promoted legendary figure in the White Horse Righteousness. At a young age, he was already the commander of a provincial cavalry army under Lingzhou's General Han Laozhan. This time he followed the 2 deputy commanders to North Jebei City outside the pass. This valiant warrior who had followed His Royal Highness to the Central Plains Jianghu and rushed to the Iron Gate Pass of the Western region to kill Prince Zhao Kai of Liang was not present in the hall. Instead, he stood at the gate with his saber in his arms and closed his eyes to rest. His aura was cold like a merciless door god, who would draw his saber at anyone who disagreed with him. Liangzhou's provincial governor Bai Yu, Liangzhou's chancellor Wang, and Southern Border's Grandmaster Qing Baishuang walked over together. After the 3 of them met, they hit it off and chatted happily. Chancellor Wang then sneakily took out a few pots of green ant wine that he had kept for a long time and pulled the 2 scholars to drink together. An hour ago, after the counselor informed him that there would be a meeting in the main hall tonight, Chancellor Wang, who was in a good mood, felt a bit embarrassed. If he staggered into the heavily guarded main hall with the smell of alcohol all over his body, it would be inappropriate. Besides, Chancellor Wang didn't have that kind of courage. He was already so old, so no matter how thick his skin was, he really couldn't endure the sharp gazes of those crude generals. Chancellor Wang clearly knew who was the soft persimmon in this North Jebei city. It was not Li Gongda or Yang Shenxing, this kind of old fox, nor was it Bai Yu, this kind of gentleman. It was not even that group of hot-blooded military counselors. It was obviously the young king. Even if the old gentleman did not keep his mouth shut and leaked the story of how he came out by leaning on the wall, wasn't it all loud thunder but small raindrops? He was only defeated by the young king, who flew into a rage out of humiliation on the chessboard. Other than that, Chancellor Wang did not dare to show the slightest strange indulgence of a famous scholar. The reason was very simple. The old gentleman knew that the civil and military leaders of Beiyang would never fall for this trick, and the old gentleman himself was not good at it. Therefore, Chancellor Wang only dared to pull the two people to the entrance of the meeting hall after using all his strength to disperse most of the wine smell. As a result, the door god at the entrance did not stop the distinguished and elegant Mr. White Lotus, but he stopped Chancellor Wang and Qing Baishuang. Bai Yu, as the little celestial master of the Celestial Master Mansion on Mount Longhu in the ancestral court of Taoism in the past, also vividly carried forward the style of sacrificing friends rather than oneself. He turned a deaf ear to the old gentleman's request for help behind him. After striding over the threshold, he only turned his head and cast a helpless look. Chancellor Wang had originally promised Qing Baishuang that they could enter the meeting hall hand in hand, but his old face suddenly became bleak. He first gave Qing Baishuang a heroic smile, indicating that she could rest assured that he would take care of everything. Then he turned around and whispered to the young general, saying that His Highness trusted this Grand Master of Southern Border very much and that Qing Baishuang was a person with a strong character, so she would definitely not cause any trouble, let alone leak military secrets. Hong Xuan held his knife with both hands and completely ignored him with a straight face. No matter how the old gentleman lowered his head to flatter him, he just blocked the door and refused to let him pass. Chancellor Wang, who was talking until his mouth was sore, could only act shamelessly. He didn't care about being a scholar anymore and glared at him. Hong Xuan, do you believe that the king will not let me enter the meeting hall if I cry out my grievances at the top of my lungs? Lunatic Hong, who was impervious to everything, was still indifferent and sneered. Old man, just shout. When the time comes, as long as the king agrees personally, I will make way. Otherwise, based on your ridiculous smell of alcohol, I would have really gone all out with you today. The old gentleman glared at him like a bull's eyes. Hong Xuan said lazily, What? You're not convinced? Chancellor Wang wants to bully me just because you're older than me? The old man almost spat out a mouthful of blood on the body of this shameless young general. The old man was indeed a person who learned real knowledge from reading books. He lowered his voice and stretched out a finger. Hong Xuan sized him up from the corner of his eyes and his face was filled with disdain. The old man reluctantly stretched out two fingers as though he was parting with something precious. Hong Xuan muttered to himself, Scholars are just not straightforward. The old man took a deep breath and stretched out a palm to slap the arm of this young man heavily. He said with a face filled with grief, I only have this much. Killing people is just a matter of time. Hong Xuan, give me a straightforward answer. Hong Xuan raised his eyebrows and shifted his feet to make way for him. He said with a smile, After the meeting ends, I will personally go over to your side to get the wine. 5 pots of green ant. If you dare to miss even one pot, I will tear down your etiquette wing. It's only a few steps away anyway. Also remember, don't get too close. Just stand at the edge of the room with counselor. The grief-stricken old man didn't even try to bargain and hurriedly crossed the threshold. He didn't forget to turn his head and whisper to Qing Baishuang, Old Qing, it's a cool breeze and bright moon outside, the scenery is pleasant. I won't accompany you. When Chancellor Wang was about 7 to 8 steps away from the door of the meeting hall, he suddenly turned around and pointed at Hong Xuan. His face was filled with the expression of a petty person who had achieved success, mixed with the action of rolling his eyes and shaking his head. Hong Xuan immediately realized that the 5 pots of green ant wine that he had agreed on earlier were definitely wasted. He raised his leg and made a kicking action. Chancellor Wang hooked his finger, looking like he was asking for a beating. However, when the old man saw that Hong Xuan was about to barge into the meeting hall with a sneer, he immediately slipped away. Hong Xuan wasn't surprised. He turned around and continued to hug his knife with his eyes closed. It was an eye-opener for Qing Baishuang, a Mr. White Lotus who spoke elegantly and was proud of himself, a right chancellor of Shangyin Academy who almost dominated the literary world in his early years. How could he be so shameless when he came to Beiliang? Qing Baishuang, who cultivated both civil and martial arts and had profound attainments in both, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he didn't get angry and didn't leave in shame. Instead, he stood outside the door of the meeting hall and looked inside. He asked softly, "May I ask this general, can I stand here and listen to the meeting inside the room?" Hong Xuan didn't open his eyes and said in a bad mood, "Since the prince allowed you to walk around the residence as you wish, then as long as you don't cross the threshold tonight, it doesn't matter if you stand outside the door and listen. Even if you lie down, I won't stop you." Qing Baishuang, who almost had the aura of a Confucian sage, dismissed it with a smile. Previously, when he was drinking and chatting with Chancellor Baiyu, Qing Baishuang heard a lot of interesting anecdotes. The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener listened attentively. Baiyu said that the young prince would occasionally leave the study room on the right side of the signing room and go to the room on the left side of the signing room, which was called the Vegetable Garden by North Jiu City. That was the headquarters of the military counselor. Because these young people with different backgrounds didn't have any official rank, they only wore the green robes of Confucian scholars. When they gathered together, it looked like a green vegetable garden. Moreover, these people were the students of Beiliang. Whether they were born in Beiliang or scholars from other places, they all took root and grew up in North Jiu City. From time to time, Su Fingyan would go there to sit regardless of day or night. There were no long speeches. He just chatted with those scholars who were mostly of the same age. Most of them were trivial matters. At most, they talked about writing articles and learning. On the contrary, they rarely talked about the important matters of the country. The word peace was used to govern the country, and the war at the border was not mentioned much. Once Mr. White Lotus had nothing to do, so he joined in. That night, a king of Beiliang and a provincial governor of Liangzhou were surrounded by dozens of scholars in green robes. They were talking and laughing. When a military counselor said that he was willing to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy without hesitation, the young prince didn't refuse or approve. He just looked around and saw the young faces of the scholars. Only then did he tell the impassioned scholar that the scholar was the one behind the scenes. He was willing to give advice for the country's affairs. He was willing to speak out for the country's affairs. He was willing to fight to the death for the border army. This was a great contribution that no one could forget. Besides, if you scholars were willing to die, it would be a good thing. But I, Su Fingyan, would never advocate this. From Su Xiao to me, we have always believed that the Beiliang cavalry was guarding the border. Since they were outside the border, with cold sabers on their waists and horses on their waists, it was natural for them to die on the battlefield when they couldn't retreat. As for the scholars who were not good at archery and horse fighting, it was enough to have the heart. Beiliang didn't want to and shouldn't ask you scholars to sacrifice your lives. It could even be said that it was understandable that scholars who had never experienced the smoke of war were afraid of death and cherished their lives. Scholars in the study and warriors on the battlefield each had their own duties. The former used the tip of the pen to write righteous words to express their feelings, while the latter wore armor to defend against the enemy. You do your job and I do mine so that I have a clear conscience. As for the ordinary people who lived in the streets and alleys, they shouldn't be expected to come to the border to kill the enemy. They should live a peaceful life. Chapter 1981. Qing Baishuang put his hands behind his back and turned his back to the meeting hall. He looked at the archway and fell into deep thought. As the emergency strategy was formally finalized, there were many generals hurriedly leaving the meeting hall in batches. In the end, even great ancestor Gu and Qin Yunchui, the two border generals stationed in North Jebei City, also stepped out of the door. The young king and Chancellor Wang finally walked out side by side and came to Qing Baishuang, who had been standing at the door for nearly 2 hours. Baiyu had already gone to the house to discuss matters. He was destined to stay up until dawn, so he didn't have time to greet Qing Baishuang. The young king saw the southern wilderness master who relied on the opportunity of the Confucian sage to reach the great celestial state in Wudong Mountain. Su Fengyan chuckled softly. After Chao Chongqing and Xianyuan Jingqing, there will finally be another Confucian sage in the world. The three of them walked down the stairs together. Qing Baishuang shook his head and said, limited by the pattern, I can't reach the realm of Confucian sage. Su Fengyan wondered, what do you mean? Qing Baishuang smiled and said, even now, I still don't have the state of mind to establish a heart for heaven and earth, to inherit the lost knowledge for the past saints, and to create peace for all ages. Su Fengyan nodded, but he didn't look down on the old Confucian scholar. Qing Baishuang suddenly asked, Your Highness, what do you think is a scholar? Su Fengyan thought for a moment and replied, scholars rule the country, peace and prosperity. Qing Baishuang asked again, in troubled times when the country is in trouble, what should scholars do? Su Fengyan said without hesitation, don't ask too much of them. Qing Baishuang smiled and asked, shouldn't scholars rise up resolutely to save the country? Su Fengyan smiled and dismissed it, that's none of my business. The responsibility of scholars is chosen by scholars themselves. Whether they are willing or not, whether they dare or not, whether they can do it or not, it's all the scholar's business. Qing Baishuang seemed to be a little surprised by this statement. After a long silence he smiled and said, that's true. At daybreak outside Zhubei City, a horse galloped from Lu Zhou's Old Woman Mountain to the east of Zhubei City. Before approaching the city gate, Lu Huang suddenly pulled the reins and stopped the horse. Turning his head, he saw a man who was far away from the battlefield but was still clad in iron armor and had two sabers at his waist. The man was looking up and smiling at him. Lu Huang dismounted from his horse and felt an extremely unfamiliar strong murderous aura from his senior brother. He couldn't help but ask, what about that Xie guy? Groom Yu sighed softly, I can only say that he's not dead yet. Xie Shibian's injuries are extremely severe. Lu Huang didn't say anything more. Groom Yu hesitated for a moment. Junior Lu, I have a favor to ask of you. Lu Huang said without hesitation, just say it. Groom Yu said sadly, I might have to trouble you to bring Little Green Robe back to the Central Plains. I've traveled a lot with her. I originally thought that she would be able to stay carefree at tide-listening lake on Mount Qingliang, climbing trees and catching fish with her peers, and then slowly grow up. Now it seems that it's going to be very difficult. Lu Huang shook his head. You can ask Su Fengyan to find someone else for this matter. I can't help you. Groom Yu frowned. You also want to stay? Lu Huang snorted. Could it be that only you, Groom Yu, can be heroic and I, Lu Huang, can't be heroic for once? Groom Yu was speechless. Lu Huang said regretfully, it's a pity that you and I don't have a good sword for the time being. Groom Yu patted the cold saber at his waist and smiled. After using it, I found that it's very useful. I don't even need to carry the saber away. It's quite carefree. Lu Huang joked, why don't you share one with me? Groom Yu decisively refused, don't even think about it. Lu Huang clicked his tongue, I also want you to promise me something. Groom Yu smiled, let's hear it first. We'll see if you agree or not. Lu Huang grinned, if I kill more people than you on the battlefield outside the pass, how about you call me senior brother in the future? Groom Yu patted this junior brother's shoulder and said earnestly, although a junior brother who doesn't want to be a senior brother isn't a good junior brother, as a senior brother, I can understand this feeling. Unfortunately, I still won't agree to it. Lu Huang didn't feel surprised. He led the horse forward with a smile on his face. In the many years in Eastern Sea's martial emperor city, the two of them didn't have any interactions and wouldn't chat casually like this. Groom Yu, who seemed to be easy to talk to but was actually the hardest to talk to, was too talented, too good of a bone structure, too high of a cultivation and too deep of a comprehension of the sword. Therefore, even if he had the best temper among all of Wang Xinji's disciples, he would give others the feeling that he was looking down on you. Lu Huang really couldn't like that kind of Groom Yu. The current Groom Yu and his junior brother Lu Huang, who was extremely competitive, couldn't be hated. Groom Yu suddenly said, if I can leave Beiliang's border alive, I will find a graceful and charming girl and find a peaceful and quiet village to spend the rest of my life with. Lu Huang nodded, not bad. Groom Yu sighed, it is very good. However, I am also quite worried right now. With my appearance as a bridegroom, finding a beautiful young lady from northern Liang's Toji County would be a piece of cake. But junior martial brother, with your appearance, what should I do? What if I see a girl that I don't like and want to introduce her to you, but they only like me? It will be very difficult for me. Lu Huang took a deep breath. He took another deep breath. Only then did he resist the urge to beat him up. At noon, in a secluded courtyard of the feudal residence, a white-haired, white-clothed, one-armed old man raised his cup and drank wine leisurely. This old man, who was addicted to swallowing the world's famous swords, was not only of the same generation as Lu Songtao. Not only did he compete with Li Chungang in the way of the sword, but he was also the master of the West Shu Sword Emperor and Qingliang Mountain Sword Juhuang. Chapter 1982. On the opposite side of the stone table was the current head of the Dongyue sword pool, Cai Qingshan. Although Cai Qingshan's status in the pugilistic world and reputation in the Central Plains was much higher than the reclusive sword-eating ancestor, in terms of seniority in the pugilistic world, the 70-year-old Cai Qingshan was still 1 or even 2 generations younger than Sui Xiegu. Sui Xiegu had once visited the sword pool when he was 30 and defeated an elder of the sword pool with the surname Song. The latter was already 60 years old at the time. Although he was defeated and his sword became Sui Xiegu's delicacy, the elder still held Sui Xiegu in high regard before he passed away. He saw Sui Xiegu as a fellow swordsman. When the young Cai Qingshan entered the Dongyue sword pool as an outsider, he became the brother of the previous head of the Dongyue sword pool. He was taught by the previous head of the sect, Song Yanqing. Therefore, when he finally saw Sui Xiegu in person today, Cai Qingshan bowed respectfully. Sui Xiegu recalled the past and said slowly, "Back then, whenever Li Chungang defeated a famous swordsman in the pugilistic world, I would follow closely behind and join in the fun. However, after some swordsmen lost to Li Chungang, their sword hearts were covered in dust and their sword wills were shattered. Naturally, I had an unfair advantage." At this point, Sui Xiegu glanced at Cai Qingshan and sneered, "Song Yanqing's father, your master, was such a person. He could not afford to lose, and after being humiliated, he died in depression. On the other hand, although your martial granduncle's swordsmanship was not as good as his nephew's, his temperament was clearly more tenacious. After losing to me, he trained himself for 20 years. When we fought again, he still lost. But do you know what that 100-year-old old man said with a smile when he saw me break his sword with his own eyes?" Cai Qingshan shook his head. Sui Xiegu narrowed his eyes and sighed. That old man laughed and said that his mother's life was only 100 years. How could a 3-foot sword be enough? This old man still wants to practice swordsmanship in his next life and the next 100 years. Cai Qingshan was silent, but his mind was filled with longing. Sui Xiegu said calmly, "Speaking of which, your master's swordsmanship was destroyed. His heart was not strong enough. After all, as the head of a sect, especially in the Dongyue sword pool, which had a long history of swordsmanship, he probably had to bear the burden of his family's prosperity since he was in his mother's womb. Naturally, it was hard to let it go." Cai Qingshan, who was still the head of the sword sect, sighed. Sui Xiegu said, "It's even harder." Cai Qingshan was stunned. At this moment, Hong Shuan, who did not leave North Jebei City with Wang Ji and Huang Xiaokuai, walked into the courtyard. He was holding a huge wooden box. His expression was as if someone owed him 1,000,000 taels of silver. He slammed the wooden box on the stone table. He stared at Sui Xiegu and said, "His Highness asked me to bring this to you. There are 6 swords in a box. Other than the 2 swords of Fuji of Shu, there are also the 4 swords of Jingshi and Dragon's Scale that were kept in Tide Listening Pavilion for many years." Sui Xiegu casually opened the wooden box. The sword chi was dense. The small courtyard was like it was in the middle of winter. There were indeed many peerless and famous swords, like each and every one of the beauties who were beautiful enough to cause the downfall of a city, but were kept in their boudoir. Sui Xiegu muttered to himself, "It's rare for that kid to make a loss." Sui Xiegu waved his sleeves and closed the sword box. He raised his head and smiled. "This is definitely not your Highness' original intention. If I'm not wrong, it's Su Weisheng's daughter's idea?" Hong Shuan was not in awe of some sword-eating ancestor. He said unhappily, "I'm only responsible for sending the swords here." Just as the young man was about to turn and leave, Sui Xiegu suddenly opened his mouth and said, "For swords should be enough for me to make a move. You can take back 2 swords. This old man is not someone who would take advantage of a burning house." Hong Shuan bent down at lightning speed and opened the sword box. He hurriedly asked, "Senior Sui, may I ask which 2 swords of Fuji are?" Sui Xiegu laughed coldly and could not be bothered to answer. The sword was named Fuji. It was very easy to recognize. The body of the sword was long and narrow and there were inscriptions on the scabbard. Hong Xuan did not spend any effort to identify it. However, he was not sure which sword was the Fuji that was equally famous as Fuji. After much difficulty he identified the other 3 swords. In the end he had to choose between 2 swords. He was hesitant as he was afraid that if he took the wrong one he would cause His Highness to suffer a huge loss. Sui Xiegu reached out and twirled his snow-white eyebrows with a playful smile. Hong Xuan gritted his teeth and was about to pick up an ancient sword that looked like a Fuji. Just as he grabbed the scabbard, he heard Sect Master Chai of the Dongyue sword pool cough softly. Hong Xuan immediately put down the long sword in his hand and grabbed the other sword in the black scabbard. He held one sword in each hand and laughed happily as he left quickly. Chai Qingshan hesitated and said, "I hope Senior will not take it to heart." Sui Xiegu had an indifferent expression. "It does not matter." At dusk, an old man in scholarly robes who had taken off his Daoist robes slowly walked towards the bridge towards the north. A tall woman in white blocked his path on the bridge. The old man did not care. He walked onto the bridge and asked with a smile, "Celestials, why are you making things difficult for immortals?" The woman with snow-white eyes said coolly, "The heavens will not tolerate the actions of great rebels." The old man smiled and pretended to be surprised. "Oh." The tall woman was the Qi cultivator Grandmaster Tantai Pingjing. Her gaze grew sharper. "Zhao Chongling. You were not suppressed in the water-moon sky well back then because the heavens had given you a way out. I advise you not to reach for a yard after being given an inch." The old man made a sound of acknowledgement. "So what?" She stood in the middle of the bridge. "If you dare to come forward, even if I have to fight Su Fengyan, I will destroy your soul." The old man laughed. "You scared me to death." The old man suddenly stopped smiling. "Pity, I am the immortal of the heavens, Zhao Chongling." Chapter 1983. Facing Zhao Chongling, who called himself an immortal, Tantai Pingjing showed a hint of disdain. "Banished immortals are banished immortals. Do you think that you are a Daoist spiritual master of the mortal world, and that no matter where you are seen as an unreachable immortal by the people?" Tantai Pingjing was undoubtedly the only remaining great grandmaster of the Qi cultivators in the mortal world. She exposed Zhao Chongling's past. When immortals came to the mortal world, they were no longer immortals of longevity. They were like a powerful central official who had been banished out of the capital and wandered thousands of miles. While they would not become homeless dogs, their power was far less than in the past. When in Rome, do as the Romans do and follow the local rules. Back then, in the battle outside the imperial astronomer, Su Fengyan had used his power to kill countless ancestors of Longhu Mountain who had walked out of the statues. He had the advantage of the mortal world. If Su Fengyan was someone who had ascended from the mortal world, and met so many ancestors of Longhu Mountain who had achieved longevity, he would undoubtedly lose. Compared to Zhao Chongling's bravado at this moment, Tantai Pingjing was more curious about how this person had been able to escape the heavenly way, and escape as a scholar after death, and not become an incomplete soul in the well. Zhao Chongling did not continue forward. He stood near the railing of the bridge and looked at the quietly flowing river. The river flowed endlessly and did not give up day or night. The old man dressed in ancient spring and autumn scholarly robes had his hands behind his back as he thought of the past. He frowned as though he thought of many heavy matters that could not be mentioned. One of the 3 great demons of the spring and autumn period, the butcher Su Shao. This great general of Liang whose achievements shocked the emperor, his life could be divided into 2 parts. Before this he had worked for the old emperor of Liang, Zhao Li. After that, the incense that the Su and Zhao families had accumulated over the years was almost completely gone. Zhao Dun had won the battle for the throne, and the new emperor had been the most meritorious official of the previous dynasty before ascending the throne. There was a grudge between the 2 families. The Su and Zhao families started to be strangers. Zhang Jilu's court reached the top, and opened the peak of the imperial court's secret encirclement and suppression of the Bailiang frontier army. In the imperial examinations, there was a threshold for Bailiang scholars to enter the bureaucracy of the Central Plains. He used Kai Nan, a direct descendant of Gu Jiantang, and the Duke of Huainan Zhaoying to work together to impede the Bailiang. In the end, the Su family, including the Su family, became non-human beings. They lived in a corner of the northwest of the Central Plains, and were not seen as people of the Central Plains. The reason why Li Yishan was seen as the least outstanding of the top strategists of the spring and autumn period was largely because after Zhao Chongling's death, he did not turn the tide and successfully help the Su family and Beiliang integrate into the Central Plains. This caused the Zhao imperial court to view Beiliang as a great threat. Because of this, the Su family and Zhao families had no victories to speak of. The Su family's cavalry, as the cornerstone of the border army, had never received the financial support of the Central Plains. On the other hand, the Zhao family also buried the roots of the two Guangling River rebellions. While they secretly pushed for West Chu to revive, and barely achieved the goal of weakening the vassal kings and generals, the progress of the war was not smooth. The loss of Liang's power was great, clearly far exceeding the expectations of the old Grand Secretary Zhang Julu when he was alive. This caused the ambitious Yan King Zhao Bing, who had been bitterly suppressed in the south for 20 years, to develop the desire to fight for the Central Plains. Similarly, the Su family also continuously fought bitter battles, greatly damaging their vitality. Even though they obtained a great victory in the First Great Battle of Liangmang, the northern Mang cavalry still wasn't willing to pinch the Liangliao border army and the Ji province border army that were even easier to deal with. They decided to first go down to northern Liang and then swallow up the Central Plains. That was why from the current situation, northern Liang's Su family, Liang's Zhao Shi, and the northern Mang Empress, all three of them had lost. On the contrary, it was the Yan King Zhao Bing and that puppet king Jinggan Zhao Sun who was about to proclaim himself emperor who benefited the most. As for the great pillar state Gu Jiantang who had been biding his time until now, how this martial artist of the spring and autumn four great generals would make his decision was still full of suspense. With Zhao Chongling's assistance, even though Su Zhao's achievements shocked the emperor, he was not cooked by the hounds. He was given the title of king and spent his later years in the northwest border. After Zhao Chongling died on the western Shu battlefield, it was Li Yishan's turn to support the Su family alone. But now, with the 400,000 cavalry of Beimang pressing against the northern city, the young king was likely to die young. The two Su family strategists, Su Zhao's right and left arms, had obvious achievements. Zhao Chongling did not insist on going north into the city, so Tantai Pingjing did not attack. A crossing bridge could create a world of its own. With Tantai Pingjing's superb celestial being cultivation and her great luck, it might be a little far-fetched to ask her to open up a fairyland. However, it would be very easy to just isolate the other celestial being's senses and set up a prison at a certain time and place. Zhao Chongling said to himself, "In the spring and autumn period I was a strategist and a strategist to my bones." Also, unlike the sages of the Qin dynasty who were not nobles, Zhao Chongling came from a top-class family. So at that time the rulers, ministers and ministers of the countries were willing to treat me as an honored guest even though I was in the enemy camp. I went out on general's orders again and again and was always successful. I won the reputation of unhindered eloquence and unparalleled flexibility. Some of the scholars under general's command even felt that Zhao Chongling could shoulder both strategy and decisiveness, and did not need Li Yishan, who came from a poor background, to worry. Zhao Chongling slowly shook his head and said emotionally, "How would the world know that this is not the case? Righteousness is Confucianism on the outside and Tao on the inside. This is the foundation of the Su family's army, and caused General to be able to keep on fighting in the spring and autumn war. In the end, Zhao Chongling, am just the face of the Su family's cavalry and the icing on the cake. Righteousness is indispensable and is helping General in his hour of need. 20 years ago, righteousness might not have been able to do better than me or worse. But in the spring and autumn war I am far inferior to righteousness. I fear that the so-called 300,000 Beiliang cavalry in the world has already fallen apart, or become a wedding dress for others." Zhao Chongling suddenly turned and smiled. "The heavens are clear and retribution is not good. Sect Master Tantai, are you curious why the heavens have opened a path for me?" Tantai Pingjing was cold and silent and did not speak. Zhao Chongling did not care. He looked up at the sky. "Because among my disciples Qin Zhibao, Yao Jian, Yi Shizhen and General's brother-in-law Wu Qi are all important pawns to the immortals in the heavens. Qin Zhibao is especially important. Of the spring and autumn war, the Zhao family of Liang destroyed 8 countries and took them into one. They are at odds with the north and south of Beimang. This is still the arrangement approved by the immortals. But if one side can rest for 20 years and unify the world, The territory of the dynasty far surpasses the Qin at its peak. And then the people of the world will obtain peace for at least 100 years. It will go against the original intention. Zhao Chongling looked away and pointed at North Jebei City. So even if Su Fengnian can succeed in inheriting the throne, he should die outside Liangzhou Pass, under the hooves of the grassland warhorses. Then the Bailiang cavalry will be given to Qin Jibao. He will guard the northwest and form a triangle with Li Yang and Bei Meng. The three sides will fight for supremacy and the flames of war will never end. In the end, the Zhao family of Li Yang will be able to continue for more than 100 years. During this time, the Bei Meng grasslands will fall into internal strife. After that woman's death, the imperial family's Yelu Dongchuang, his relative Murong Baoding, and the military's leader Dong Zhuo will be in a triangle. The internal strife will not end and they will be greatly weakened. Qin Jibao will take the initiative to attack twice. The first time he will attack the grasslands in the north. He will fight all the way to the heart of the Bei Meng court, but he will be trapped in the cold weather and cannot make the final decision. In his twilight years he will choose to attack Li Yang. The latter will send an envoy to the grasslands, and at the great price of ceding Jizhou, ask the grasslands to send troops to harass Qin Jibao's Liangzhou rear. Qin Jibao finally reached Great Peace City but was unable to break through. He regretfully retreated and had no chance of taking over the world. The emperor of Liyang Zhao Zhuan in his prime and in his later years, fought 2 great battles against Bailiang. There were no results. Liyang lost but did not fall. Bailiang won but lost the overall situation. In the end, the king of Bailiang that Qin Jibao created will die after 3 generations, and he will withdraw from the fight for hegemony. Zhao Chongling laughed out loud. This may be the earliest trend of the world in the eyes of that strange person Huang Longshi. But it is a pity that the talented Su Fengnian sought his own death. He changed the established situation on the spur of the moment, and caused Su Fengnian's rise to be unstoppable. It forced Qin Jibao, who retreated in order to advance, to still be unable to smoothly take over the 300,000 cavalry. Everything is in chaos. If Zhao Ningxin invited the first grandmasters of Longhu Mountain to fight Su Fengnian at the Spring God Lake, it was just a clever test by the mastermind behind the scenes, to test the bottom line of a certain great person in the heavens. Then after Liyang Zhaoshi broke the rules and invited the grandmasters of Longhu Mountain who have been worshipped for countless years, the immortals in the heavens turned a blind eye and broke the rules they set. As to the recent almost blatant plans to increase Beimeng's power, they are shedding all pretense. Chapter 1984. Zhao Chongling pointed at the sky and then at his feet. His smile was slightly mocking. Actually, everywhere is the same. There is no faction fighting. Some things have to be done before they stop. One side finished singing, the other side appeared. You go back and forth. In fact, many ancient sayings from the human world have already explained the principles of the heavens and the world. Finished. To tell you the truth, the important person who chose you, Tantai Pingjing, used immortal methods back then to make the heavens give me a way out. This is not his act of rewarding a meritorious official, but some things have to be cleaned up. Otherwise, if there is evidence left behind, it will not be easy to clean up. Also, he needs me to help keep an eye on Qin Jibao. Otherwise, how do you think Qin Jibao could become a fake Confucian saint so quickly after becoming a king and vassal of the Western Shu sect? It is not that there is no such thing in the world, but it needs to be accumulated over a long period of time to make the water flow into a canal. Qin Jibao becoming a half-step Confucian saint was like pulling up seedlings to help them grow. It was forced on his fate. There was no other way. Huang Longshi caused trouble. First he pestered endlessly and was extremely rude. Then he handed it to Su Fengnian to continue playing. Originally, with Qin Jibao's temperament and foundation, he could naturally become a Confucian saint in the future. Tantai Pingjing finally asked, after Chao Chongqing died, of the 3 portions of fate, the largest portion was scattered to the Guangling sect. The smallest portion was intercepted by me. The 3rd portion was a transaction. It was the prerequisite for the first portion to successfully merge into the old West Chu territory. This last portion should have gone to Western Shu. Why was Qin Jibao unwilling to accept it? Zhao Chongling was very proud. After inexplicably becoming a half-baked Confucian saint, how could my proud disciple not sense it? Later he cooperated with the ambitious Ye Feiyu. The two appeared to be united but were divided at heart. Qin Jibao was just feigning civility. Also, with his conceit, How could he be willing to accept a favor that was so easily obtained? The disciple that I Zhao Chongling chose, Qin Jibao, is a great talent that has not appeared in 500 years. Tantai Pingjing sneered and said, the founding emperor of the Great Feng dynasty reincarnated as a banished immortal. He is indeed worthy of the saying that he has not appeared in the world for 500 years. Zhao Chongling asked with a smile, Tantai Pingjing, do you want to know which immortal you are? This old man can answer your questions and tell you about your past and present lives. The great Grandmaster Qi refinement warrior whose nature had always been close to the ruthless nature of heaven seemed to have his reverse scale touched. He flew into a rage for the first time and said sternly, how dare you? Zhao Chongling smiled and said leisurely, if I have no hatred in my eyes and do not believe that there will be white hair in the world, the ancients did not lie to me. Tantai Pingjing narrowed her eyes with murderous intent. Although her snow-white robe looked calm on the whole, ripples could be seen on it if one looked closely, like fine spring water flowing through a blue stone. In the river under their feet, a slender unknown wild fish suddenly jumped out of the water and then fell back into the water. Zhao Chongling smiled knowingly. Tantai Pingjing also smiled. You've done everything you can to ruin my state of mind. Are you hoping to tell Su Fengyan in North Jebei City where we are? Zhao Chongling waved his hand and said, from the start of my journey to the north, you have been hiding from the heavens. I only sensed a little, but the Su Fengyan knows that the core world of this bridge is just your camouflage. I, Zhao Chongling, am not so naive as to think that with a few words, I can destroy the South Sea Guanyin sect's centuries-old imperturbability. You used the fish under the bridge as a test to try and break my last reliance, the immortal mind left behind after losing the immortal body. Sect Master Tantai, you and I are both smart people. Tantai Pingjing looked pitifully at this strategist of the spring and autumn period, the chief strategist of the Su family who had firmly suppressed Li Yishan when he was alive. She said with a smile, cleverness overcomes cleverness. Zhao Chongling, do you know where you are inferior to Li Yishan in my view? Zhao Chongling ignored the female Qi cultivator grandmaster's question. He frowned and turned to look at North Rejecting City. His gaze was complicated, puzzled, shocked, and in the end, understanding and disappointment. Tantai Pingjing walked forward to the south and brushed past Zhao Chongling. She said softly, Poison warrior Li Yishan is the most emotional. No matter the situation, status, fortune or disaster, in the depths of Li Yishan's heart, he is always willing to be kind to the world and choose to trust people. You're different, Zhao Chongling. So the person you choose to inherit your legacy will only be Qin Jibao. Li Yishan will choose Su Fengyan. Zhao Chongling stood in place, back to back with Tantai Pingjing who was slowly walking forward. I lost. Tantai Pingjing, you will also lose. Tantai Pingjing did not stop. She walked down the bridge and headed south without looking back. A dignified voice faintly sounded in her ears. Ordinary people, foolish beyond compare. Blood immediately gushed out of her ears. But there was a gentle smile at the corner of her mouth. She murmured, I am willing. Wherever she passed, this tall female Qi refinement grandmaster would constantly emit golden light. Her pair of treacherous snow-white eyes returned to normal. Zhao Chongling stood in place and sighed softly. A rainbow light landed on the bridge. It was the young vassal king who had hurried over from North Reject City. When the fish had jumped out of the water, the movement had seemed subtle. Zhao Chongling, who was in the world, had not been aware. But for Su Fengyan in North Reject City, it was like thunder. It was enough to see how chaotic Tantai Pingjing's state of mind had been at that time. Su Fengyan came to the bridge. He had to be wary of this old scholar who had disguised himself as a fortune-teller and was able to hide from his perception. He was no less wary than the great peace city eunuch of the same age as the country. Zhao Chongling was not in a hurry to announce his name. He asked with a smile, the books say that all good things must come to an end. The books also say that it is a small world. But in the end, since people have life and death, life is a parting. Why don't you guess who I am? Su Fengyan was unmoved. He looked to the south at the tall woman who, for some reason, chose to dissipate her own fortune and give it back to the world. Su Fengyan did not urge her to stay. He did not know how to do so. Without Tantai Pingjing holding him back, the banished immortal Zhao Chongling looked around and said leisurely, some scholars seem to care about the world, but in reality they are arrogant. In the end, they only see the empty world and disdain the country under their eyes. For example, I am one of them. Some scholars care about the country and the world. In the spring and autumn period, only Huang Longshi and Li Yishan are like that. Su Fengyan frowned and said, "Who are you?" Zhao Chongling took advantage of his seniority and said, "Didn't I ask you to guess?" Su Fengyan seemed to be weighing the pros and cons of attacking. Zhao Chongling did not seem to notice. "Your mind is not calm. What, the Beimang army is pressuring you, causing your mind to be as heavy as weeds. This is not a good sign. If you fight the blessed Tuoba with your present state of mind, you have no chance of victory. At most you will die together." Zhao Chongling sighed and looked into the distance. In the past, the Chu had a powerful family, the Zhao family, who had been in power since the founding of Dafeng. They had a 300-year feud with the Su family of Western Shu. Later they formed a deep grudge because of the Sweet Dew crossing south at the end of the Dafeng years. The Su family suffered and did not go to Guangling River, but instead opened a new path and luckily entered Western Shu. During the spring and autumn period, the Su family, who had become the family name of a country, tried to resolve the grudge and turn hostility into friendship. They took the initiative to form a marriage alliance with the wealthy Zhao family of Guangling. The Zhao family also wanted to have Western Shu as a paradise during the chaos of war, so they agreed to this marriage. A woman who bore the responsibility of the family married far away to Western Shu. In the end, she lost in the struggle for favor in the palace and lost to a woman who also came from the spring and autumn period. Su Fengyan said, "This woman was Zhao Chongling's sister. The two of them relied on each other since childhood, and the elder sister was like a mother." Zhao Chongling nodded and said, "Yes, the younger brother rose up in the family because of the elder sister. His talent and ambition were finally displayed. In the end, other than waiting for the bad news of the elder sister's death, there was only the elders of the family saying, 'This woman asked for it, her death is not regrettable.' Now that things are like this, we cannot blame the Shu Su family to avoid making things worse." The most hateful thing was that after the Western Shu emperor learned the truth, he did not feel regret. At a banquet, he smiled and said to the Guangling Zhao family emissary who had gone to mend the relationship that in the future, when the Zhao family members enter Shu to travel, they should be treated as honored guests. Only that annoying Zhao Chongling dares to ask for an explanation. An explanation? My will is the will of the heavens. If Zhao Chongling dares to go to Shu, I will treat him as an enemy. As time passed, the pain and sorrow were like an old dog lying on the ground, powerless to whimper. Su Fengyan said with a smile, "I fear that the ruler of the fallen country would never have thought that Zhao Chongling really went to Shu with 20,000 cavalry. On the Western Shu map, from the time Great Feng established the country as a commandery, to the spring and autumn period as an independent country, there has never been a foreign cavalry of more than 10,000. Zhao Chongling's lips jerked. "It is a pity that I did not see the Su family's cavalry charge into the capital of Western Shu. You have to know that the general once promised Zhao Chongling that as long as the gates of the Western Shu imperial palace were breached, Zhao Chongling would be at the front. At that time it would not be a problem to kill with his own hands or to sit on the dragon throne." Su Fengyan exhaled, turned and bowed to the old scholar. He said gravely, "Su Fengyan greets Mr. Zhao." Zhao Chongling also turned and shook his head. "I am not worthy of this bow." Su Fengyan lowered his head and said, "Worthy?" Zhao Chongling had no choice but to respectfully return the greeting. Chapter 1985. After the two stood still again, Zhao Chongling smiled and said, "Do not take what I said that day seriously. I have caused you to suffer for nothing these years. I, Zhao Chongling, and am half of Qin Jibao's master, am the main culprit. This time I am here to make up for it. But due to the heavenly path or other important people, I cannot help you directly. I can only add some additional destiny to Baoyang. But this can only offset the additional destiny that Beimang has from the heavens. The celestials have their own rules. No one can truly cover the sky with one hand. After all, there are more people who do not think highly of Baoyang. This time we have deceived the heavens. This is the limit of that person. You and I know that person." Su Fengyan was relieved. "This is already very good." Zhao Chongling shook his head and said, "But Tuoba has the body of a great Vajra realm celestial, and his comprehension of the profound finger and celestial phenomenon realms is astounding. The profound finger is the profound finger of the Daoist great longevity, And the celestial phenomenon is the celestial phenomenon of the scholarly saint. What kind of celestial is he? You will rarely meet a match in the heavens. Su Fengnian made a sound of acknowledgement but said, Tuoba may not be flawless. I have to look at the timing. Zhao Chongling said in surprise, Why do you say this? I am curious. Su Fengnian blinked. The mysteries of the heavens cannot be revealed. Zhao Chongling laughed joyfully. Of course. Zhao Chongling's smile faded. Let's wait and see tonight. Before Su Fengnian could speak, Zhao Chongling's figure flashed and disappeared. I will walk around and take this chance to say some inhumane things to Ishan. Su Fengnian did not return to the study. Instead he went straight to the backyard. Jia Jiejia was teasing the big cat. The so-called big cat was different from the stray cats in the streets. In fact, this cat was still young. It liked to eat bamboo, but it was not a vegetarian. The war was imminent. Whether it was for public or private reasons, Su Fengnian could not use the spies of the Fu Shui chamber and the soldiers within his borders to transport it to the north resisting city. Su Fengnian's intention was simple. If the situation became worse, the girl Jia Jiejia should not die here. He hoped that she could leave the north resisting city, leave the Guanyi, and even leave the northern Liang for the sake of this big cat. She could go to western Shu, which had not been affected by the war, and take the big cat to a place where the bamboo was as dense as the sea. Su Ying's whereabouts were unknown. She should have left the city. Jiang and I sat on a small stool in a daze. Even when Su Fengnian walked in front of her, she did not come back to her senses. Su Fengnian smiled and waved his hand in front of her eyes. She finally woke up and glared at him. Su Fengnian sat next to her. I know you will not leave, but I hope you can do one thing. Only if you agree will I let you stay in North Resisting City. Jiang and I nodded. Speak. Su Fengnian grinned. I will take it that you have agreed. Jiang and I widened her limpid eyes, her face filled with resentment. Su Fengnian put his hands behind his head and said softly, It is good to be alive. Jiang and I said in exasperation, Nonsense. Su Fengnian solemnly retorted, That's not nonsense. Jiang and I turned around and asked curiously, You just went out and floated here and there. How carefree. Don't tell me you accidentally hit your head on the ground and became stupid? Su Fengnian leaned forward and said with a smile, Why don't you touch it? Jiang Ni's face flushed red and she spat out 2 words with difficulty, Pervert. Su Fengnian sat up straight and rested his chin on his hands. He looked at the courtyard and sighed. In North Resisting City, Xianyuan Qingfeng found Su Yanbing and said that he wanted to fight. Su Yanbing was unwilling and Xianyuan Qingfeng was even more unwilling. Su Yanbing was familiar with this crazy woman's personality. He did not give her a chance to attack and directly ran to the study of the manor to cultivate. Outside the North Barbarian City, a red robe swept across the sky, like a splendid red cloud that landed in the mortal world. 30 li east of North Resisting City, a woman in a veil hat stood beside a man in white. The former had a valiant appearance that made people forget about the difference between men and women. The latter had a graceful figure, but under the veil hat was a terrifying face covered in scars. Her eyes were dull and lifeless. Su Ying was overjoyed when she saw the man in white. Her red robe flew around the man in white. The man in white reached out and pressed his hand on Su Ying's forehead. The latter's body suddenly stopped in the air. After the man in white withdrew his hand, he glanced at the woman beside him and said indifferently, Among the 3 of us, you are the most miserable. That vixen and I have never even seen you as an opponent, but you think you have a place in that person's heart. After waiting for so many years, you finally divined that he would come to the human world, but you still did not have the time to meet him. Once again you will be separated forever. Why did you come? The man in white suddenly laughed. It's better if you don't see him. He will only be sadder if he sees you. In that case, this little idea of yours in the princess tomb is not extremely miserable. I only hope that you did not reveal your background to the Beimeng before leaving the princess tomb. Otherwise, with those treasuries, it would be equivalent to letting the Beimeng barbarians conquer half of the Central Plains in advance. Su Ying landed on the ground with a charming smile. The man in white, who was the #1 demonic cultivator in Beimeng and Liang, rubbed Su Ying's head. Only you are the most fortunate, right? Su Ying only smiled foolishly. Luoyang in white laughed loudly. That city will soon be renamed as Luoyang City. Chapter 1986. The number one person of Nanzhao, Wei Miao, lived in a small, secluded house in the north-resisting city. When he heard a series of urgent knocks on the door, he went to open it and saw an unexpected but reasonable face. It was the wife he had parted with on Mount Wudong. Wei Miao asked helplessly, "What are you doing here? Didn't I ask you to go back to Nanzhao?" She rolled her eyes and said, "Go back your head, why do I need a man to accompany me? I can't sleep alone at night." Wei Miao said angrily, "Go find one." She smiled charmingly and said, "If I really bring a son of a bitch to you, I will smash your head with a punch." Wei Miao, who was invincible in Nanzhao, couldn't do anything to her. Knowing that she would never leave this time, he accepted his fate and led his wife into the courtyard. This woman, who was born in the 100,000 Barbarian Mountain, looked around curiously. "That little handsome brother is too stingy, this house is not worth much." Wei Miao said, "It's just a temporary residence, he didn't say that he would give it to us." She curled her lips, "This melon child." Wei Miao lowered his voice and said, "That person can hear you." She hurriedly changed her expression as if the young lord was in the small courtyard. She said sweetly, "This courtyard is very good." Wei Miao held back his laughter. In the end, this old man and his wife sat side by side on the steps. Although Wei Miao never thought that he and her were a celestial couple, after so many years of traveling in Jianghu together, they met countless heroines and fairies. Wei Miao didn't remember any woman at all. She leaned her head on Wei Miao's shoulder and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't give birth to a baby for you." Wei Miao stretched out his rough palm and gently caressed her cheeks. He helped her wipe away her tears. This simple and honest man who had never said anything sweet said softly, "Even if there were 10 Wei Miaos, they wouldn't be good enough for you, wife really." Night fell. As day and night alternated, a series of thunderous noises suddenly sounded in the sky outside the Beiliang Pass. For some reason only the young king could hear and see it. The other Wu Dao Grand Masters, who were as powerful as Dong Tai, didn't notice anything unusual. Zhao Chongling appeared on the city walls and laughed. "Everyone, if we do not descend now, what are we waiting for?" An immortal in the sky echoed loudly, "De Chu is the Central Plains." The scholar took off his shabby Taoist robe and put on a scholarly robe. "Li Mi. What did you? It's West Chu." A beam of magnificent rainbow light descended into the mortal world and landed on the top of the North Jebei city. It came with a menacing momentum, but it was silent. Another immortal said loudly, "How can our glorious Central Plains sink under the iron hooves of the grassland?" Another immortal laughed boldly in the sky. 300,000 cavalrymen guarding the northwest gate of the Central Plains, fighting to the death for 20 years without retreating. It's fortunate to see it with my own eyes. Another immortal walked out of the heavenly gate and stretched. My De Feng dynasty was useless in the past. Now it's up to your Beiliang cavalry. A tall and sturdy immortal in black armor looked down at the mortal world. "Oh, the grassland barbarians put on such a big formation. You think you're so great just because you have more people." Immortals and rainbow lights crashed into North Jebei City one after another. Dozens of banished immortals from different dynasties became Beiliang's fate tonight. The banished immortals fell like rain to the mortal world. The young king with a cold blade at his waist stood under a loquat tree. Zhao Chongling's scattered figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Su Fengyan wanted to say something but stopped. The old man reached out. While he could not touch Su Fengyan's body, it was like he was patting the young king's head. "There is meeting and there is separation. Fate comes and goes. Do not be sad." Su Fengyan raised his arms and cupped his fists. He pursed his lips and did not speak. The old man said regretfully, "It is a pity that I cannot help you more." Su Fengyan kept his back straight and cupped his fists like a common poplar tree in the northwest desert. "Living and not dying for 1,000 years, dying and not falling for another 1,000 years, dying and not falling for another 1,000 years, dying and not falling for another 1,000 years." The old man's voice was erratic and unclear. He glanced at the new cold blade at the young king's waist and was gratified. "Good blade." Su Fengyan's lips trembled. The old man smiled. "The general told me to pass a message to you. He said that Su Zhao's greatest achievement in his life was not marrying your mother, but giving Beiliang to you. But he felt sorry for you and made you suffer." Su Fengyan shook his head. The old man said softly, Xianxia, princess consort, said that in the past she always advised you not to get into conflicts with others easily. She hoped that you could be like a gentle and refined scholar. However, if someone makes you angry in the future, it would be a waste not to beat them up. Speaking of this, the old man looked helpless. In his impression, the princess was not such a woman. The young man nodded gently with tears on his face. The thin old man closed his eyes and seemed to be listening attentively. He said sarcastically, "Huh? It seems that I heard the sound of the horses of my Su family's iron cavalry? And it is quite loud." The old man opened his eyes and asked Su Xiao as he did when he was in his prime. He asked with a smile, "What should we do?" Prince Su Fengnian loosened his fists and reached out to hold the hilt of his blade. He laughed loudly. "What should we do? It's very simple. Kill them. In the end, only the sound of the horses of my Su family's iron cavalry will be left on the battlefield." The old man finally closed his eyes. Before his soul dissipated, this strategist seemed to be reminiscing about the past and imagining the future of peace and prosperity. He said softly, "Xianxia, that's right.